sidebar, the attorneys and the defendants pick up a phone. All right, that's on the. They all have phone, so they pick up the phones so that they can hear the judge. The judge is talking into a phone, and only they can hear it, because then they flood the courtroom with white noise. So you hear this. That's all you can hear in the courtroom, but they can hear the judge talking to them, and they can speak to the judge. And what is happening during that white noise sidebar session is the court reporter, the stenographer, is recording what's happening, and it ends up in the transcript. Okay. So they just don't want the gallery or the jury to hear what's being said at that point. And so what the judge instructed the gallery, instructed both the defense and the prosecuting attorneys was, they said, you understand that there's a significant amount about this witness that is under the court seal. You guys need to be careful. I'm reading the transcript. I go, what? And so the direct examination starts. The attorneys went, oh, yeah, yes, Your Honor. Yes, sir. We're fully aware of that. So the direct examination starts, and they start typically and normally. The first question is, what's your name? Spell your name. How it always begins. What's your current occupation? And she said, I still work for the government, but she did not say what her job was. And the attorney left it at that, left it very generic. I still work for the government. He said, so you're no longer with the Capitol Police? She said, no. He said, did you leave the Capitol Police under good circumstances? She said, oh, yes, I left under, very good terms with the Capitol Police. She said, as a matter of fact, I had already filed and applied for my current position in the government before January 6th. This is in the court record. Well, my antenna, my radar is just pinging in the red now at these answers. So he finishes his direct examination. It's time for cross-examination. The judge calls another sidebar in the courtroom, but it's in the transcript. And he specifically says to the defense attorney who's about to do the cross-examination, he says, and I quote, don't you go waving this defendant's 302s around the courtroom. That's her FBI interviews.
Yep.
Well, my radar is now it's completely pegged out in the red at this point. So I had to know who this person is. And that's what got me going, and that's why I found what I found, and ultimately hitting the wall on exactly who she was or is, and exactly the things that I needed to know to continue and build this story. We went to the video, and we started looking at video of her, not only as a Capitol Police officer, because see, in the Capitol CCTV viewing room. All right. So you remember the first journalist to release video from Capitol CCTV was Tucker Carlson. He got first access from then Speaker of the House McCarthy at the time. This was early 23, like February 23. And in fact, Tucker's producers called me. They called me and said, what should we be looking for? Because they were starting from ground zero.
Right.
And I had already been looking at this stuff for a couple of years. And so where do we start? And so I gave them a couple of stories. They took one of them, and then fast forward another couple of months, and then I got access to the room. And then I was hired by the Blaze after that. And then we started bringing the Blaze team down there, and we would lock out the entire room for a week at a time. And we spent hundreds of man hours looking at Capitol CCTV. And so when I hit the wall on, because, this is a person now working for the government for some 3-letter agency, completely undisclosed at this point. And all of her internet history, most of her internet history has been scrubbed. There's still, echoes and ghost things out there from her social media days. If you look deep enough into the dark web and that sort of thing, you can find those things. And we did. But what ended up happening was, going to the video, we were able to discover video substantial amount of video of her as a Capitol Police officer on both January 6th and January 5th. Because in the viewing room, in the archives, there's actually, they archived, and what they allowed journalists access to was from December 28th of 2020 through the midnight of January 7th, 2021. So however 8, 9, 10 days, whatever that is how much access to actual Capitol behavior, from 1,800 cameras that we had access to in that room. So we were able to capture about 2.5 hours of Ms. Kirchhoff as a Capitol Police officer. And then we discovered footage of her as a soccer player, both in her college career, and she played 1 year of professional soccer after a significant college career ending injury in which she broke her tibia in half in her 4th year of college. She's an incredible athlete, incredible student. And then once she recovered, she played 1 year of semi-pro ball for a Columbus, Ohio professional soccer team. And so we captured all this video, but because I had spent an innumerable, untold number of hours tracking the gray hoodied pipe bomber, and I was very, very familiar with the gait of that pipe bomber, very unique gait once you spend enough time with it. And see, here's the thing, is it's from the 30 seconds of video that the FBI released to the public. And then they initially, I think it was a $25,000 reward, and then a $100,000 reward, and finally, the $500,000 reward that they used to get hopefully to get people to call in with leads. They actually said this when they released and announced the $500,000 reward. And as I said, less than a minute's worth of video. I always say 30 seconds worth of video. This was video that was frame rate altered.
Yeah,
it was video that had been taken down from either 30 or 40 frame rate or 10 frames per second down to 1 frame per second, which can only do one thing, and that's obscures the gate.
Right.
And so when they announced the $500,000 reward and actually said this to the public, if anyone out there recognizes somebody you work with, somebody you go to church with, they even said somebody in your family who moves, acts, or walks like this person, here's the 1-800 number to call into our tip line. They specifically, the FBI says, anybody recognize the way they walk? Well, if the FBI gave a damn about the way they walk and wanted the people to actually somebody to get that $500,000 reward, which I said at the time when they released, I said they might as well make it $5 billion, because they never have any intention of paying that out anyway, because what they've released to the public is deliberately tampered with, so you can't identify this person. And I'm not the only one that came to that conclusion. Mike Benz did, significant amount of he was the first one, I think, that did the most analysis, forensic analysis on that video. Our video expert, Armitas, who has worked with me for over 2 years now, 2.5 years or so on this project, he immediately was able to identify that not only had they reduced the frame rate, but there's frames missing. So even if you go down to the 1.2 frames per second rate that they locked in at, they made the mistake every once in a while of forgetting to put back in one of those frames. So it'll all of a sudden be, there's a missing frame. It's gone.
Yeah.
So it's been tampered with. And so the net result of that is you can't identify the gate, but we had access to Capitol CCTV video of an additional 20 minutes of who me and my team refer to as Hoodie. That's what we call the bomber, Hoodie. And we had an additional 20 minutes that the FBI has never released of Hoodie walking around the Capitol that night. And so I've seen unaltered frame rates video. And as I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at this person that we had captured 2.5 hours worth of video as a Capitol Police officer. And I'm looking at this 20 minutes, and this was just, it's just me. I just went, you've got to be effing kidding me. And I knew right then at that moment that this was bigger than me. And so I had to take it somewhere. So I have, because of the work I've done over the years, I have significant amount of contacts within the intelligence community. And I took it to somebody. I took it to an expert in this particular field of gait recognition technology and analysis as a special operator, 30 years, and had them do some analysis for me. And they came back with the famous story that we finally published on November 8th of last year, which was that we identified through gait recognition a 94% match between this officer and this gray hoodied person on the evening of January 5th. But the human intelligence, the actual human expert analysis, had it at a 98% match. And I still didn't go public with it. So now, because I don't trust the FBI at all, why would I look? Not only myself and my team, but other video experts outside of my team have analyzed this video and said it's altered. And the FBI is only releasing 30 seconds of frame rate altered video, aspect ratio altered video, and they're sitting on 30,000 video files, according to their own statements to the congressional committees. I know that at least 20 minutes of better video exists because I have it. And I know they're lying. So do you think I'm going to take my findings to the FBI? No, I took it to the agency that oversees the intelligence regime. All 18 intelligence agencies in the federal system are overseen by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The Director of National Intelligence, D&I, was Tulsi Gabbard at the time. I took it to ODNI, and sources that I had at ODNI that operated within her special, what they called the Directors Initiative Group, the DIG. And so I took it to the DIG to look at this, and it was through that I learned what I was suspicious of to begin with, that it was not just one of the three-letter agencies, but it was the three-letter agency that this individual now worked for the CIA. And that's when all hell broke loose.
Yeah, and that was before Brian Cole got charged. So you take it to them, you get responses from them. They give you some confirmation or rejection, and then I think there was an investigation that soon after was launched into Shawnee, right? So then they start to surveil her. They bring her in for a polygraph. They start to interview her, and after a certain period of time, then Brian Cole ultimately gets charged.
Yeah, the timeline of the way that works out is that sometime in early to mid October, the members of ODNI's DIG, Tulsi's Directors Initiative Group, had my evidence, and they're not an investigative organization. That's not what they do. They get data, they analyze data, but they provide this is their congressional mandate, and they were formed after 9/11 because of, if anybody out there recalls, part of the breakdown that led to 9/11 was that our intelligence agencies did not communicate with one another very well. In fact, they were highly territorial and competitive, in fact, and would not share important, vital national security information between the agencies. And so ODNI was put together to stop that from happening and coordinate and be able to see all of that coming in, and provide that oversight. but they're not an investigative agency like the FBI is, or like HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. And so Odie and I actually then reached out, because they're not an investigative agency. They reached out to some members of HSI, and that is another story in and of itself. But the point being is that there was a lot going on behind the scenes. And while this was taking place, there was a memo that was being drafted by members of the DIG. And this memo was essentially an alert to the intelligence community that we might have a significant problem in our own house. There's no conclusions, but of those analysts there who looked at the evidence I brought to them, they felt like that the evidence was strong enough for them to take it up the chain. So they were in the process of a draft memo, which then the deputy director, Tulsi's own deputy director, shared before the memo was even complete. The memo still had, the yellow lines through it. And before it was even completed, the deputy director of Odie and I shared it with the deputy director of CIA. And then when I say all hell broke loose, that was the moment that everything exploded throughout the entire intelligence community. But then they leaked it. CIA sent it over to FBI. I don't know whether it was FBI or CIA that sent it to the White House. But the bottom line is that all of these agencies had this memo, were responding to this memo, acting on this memo, and even the White House had this memo before we even published our story, before we ever even named her as the person that had a significantly high forensic match to Hoodie, the January 5th figure. And so the timeline is very simply this, is that in advance of our story coming out, the FBI already launched, they went into high gear, launched an investigation. They notified Ms. Kirchhoff and her partner in advance, the person that she lives with, that they were going to be searching their home. And now you typically don't do that in advance. You don't warn somebody you're going to raid them. And this is what we're going to be looking for. Wink, wink, nod, nod, And so the next morning, which was, if I have my dates correct in memory, November the 7th, which was a Friday, FBI raids Ms. Kirchhoff's home. I get a call about noon or just after noon from a source at Capitol Police who said, hey, you know that Kirchhoff's home is being raided by the FBI right now? I had no idea. You're kidding me. So Blaze, our then acting editor-in-chief, works out of the DC office, and he actually drove over there and verified that, in fact, her home was in the middle of a full-on, search. Anyway, call it a raid, call it whatever you want to. But they, according to her own lawyers, they launched helicopters. They brought in a bomb squad team. They brought in dogs. They brought in the SWAT team, everything. I mean, it was a full-on, typical what you would characterize as a raid took place at her home that day. That night, she was taken in for a 4-hour interview at FBI headquarters, in which she was also given a polygraph, which we also then subsequently learned through the Brian Cole Jr. case that she had failed that polygraph, and that not only had she failed it, but that the examiner, the polygrapher, had admonished her for delivering false answers and for her rehearsed answers. And
yeah, and there was a whole blow up about that, because the defense included that, I think, in the original request for the subpoenas. We have the renewed request here that we'll get to in a little bit, but they disclosed that. And then she, I think, responded, right? Part of her defense of that was that she was just under this duress and this pressure. And so it was not a reliable failure. And it's interesting to juxtapose that with what happened with Brian Cole, right? So they turn around and they say Brian Cole made a confession and he was not under duress. The interrogation was, easy peasy, and he just kind of volunteered everything. But where, the standard, I think, is a little bit misapplied. So, an interrogation for him is not a pressure test and it results in a good outcome. But then Shawnee will say that her interrogation in the polygraph was too much pressure and it resulted in a bad outcome. So it's kind of these standards that are not evenly applied across the board.
Right. That's exactly correct. So the bottom line is that all of this took place before we even published our story. The investigation.
So you had already notified them, like they know that you're on the trail.
Yes. Yeah. They knew I was on the trail even before that because of other reasons. So, you know, I'm unfortunately one of those people that they watch very closely. And as a result of that, we learned early on that they were onto what was going because of the types of calls that were coming into the Blaze at the time. I know of 5 calls specifically, that 5 calls that the executives at the Blaze notified me of coming from the 7th floor of the Hoover building. That's the FBI headquarters in DC, specifically to stop me, complain about me, or otherwise get me fired. And 2 of those calls were from Dan Bongino himself. One of those calls was from the public affairs officer, Ben Williamson. One of those calls was from then congressional liaison to the FBI, Marshall Yates. And then the final call was Kash Patel called Glenn Beck himself the Saturday before our story came out.
To stop further investigation, basically to limit your work or to get you fired.
To complain about what I was doing. Right. To complain about what I was working on. And interestingly enough, is that during that same time frame or shortly thereafter, I don't remember the exact date of the call, although I can look at my phone records and figure it out. I received a call from a senior investigative reporter at the New York Times, a guy that's been with them for over 25 years, who I know personally. And he called me and he said, Steve, has the FBI been calling your bosses and complaining about you or trying to get you fired? And I went, yeah, as a matter of fact, they have. How do you know that? He goes, well, you're not the only one that's happening to. I said, what do you mean? He goes, it looks like other right-leaning publications and news media sources are getting the same types of calls if any of their reporters start looking too closely at certain things or go off the reservation from the administration's preferred narrative. Robert, that sounds exactly like what happens on the left from left-wing administrations.
Yeah, that's troubling. I mean, if the case stands on its own 2 feet and you're reporting something, differently, then that seems to me to be just part of the, adversarial system. Like, they're charging a Brian Cole. They've got evidence for it. I want to talk to you about that. They say they've got cell phone footage. They've got purchase records. They've got materials in the back of his car. They've got the confession that we already mentioned briefly here. And if that is sufficient, then that should stand on its own 2 feet. But he also is entitled to the presumption of innocence. And if there's an alternative theory here that carries more weight, you would imagine that they would investigate that as well, unless, I can think of 2 reasons for that. One is that they're covering up for the CIA and the FBI, and they don't want the Capitol Hill police to be implicated in this gigantic scandal, which ultimately, as we can get into, deviated a huge swath of officers from the Capitol building on January 6th, and then, helped enable, I think, the chaos that went on there because they were all pulled away to the DNC and the RNC. So if they're implicated in that, and J6 was, as we've long suspected, a Fedsurrection, based on all of the HSI agents that were there, the FBI agents that were there in plain clothes, DOJ officials. We had guys like Ray Epps who were out there, saying into the Capitol. And then he got a sweetheart plea deal, was allowed to plead guilty to like a misdemeanor virtually from Arizona or wherever he was. A lot of questionable things about why the most secure building that should have been the most secure building perhaps on the planet on that day, given the fact that the entire government was inside, was just kind of left wide open. It seems very, very convenient to have this pipe bomb thing happen to distract from that security and that protection. But that, that's one theory, that they're covering up for the credibility of the entire apparatus that they're now a part of. But I could also come up with a benign reason. It's they wanted to deliver a victory. Maybe Dan doesn't know any better. Maybe Kash doesn't know any better. They just need a big score. They need to come out. We got the guy, right? Chris Wray failed. the prior FBI looked into this thing for 4 years. They couldn't figure it out. But look at us. We've come in here and now we've identified Brian Cole. And so, eureka, we've closed this case now. And so it's a major victory. And so they just want to anchor that in, and they don't want deviation on the right that might challenge that accomplishment.
Let me give you another really interesting part of this timeline that I've never actually discussed publicly, but I think this it's a good time to point this out. Is that we talked about the $500,000 reward in the accompanying video that came with that. 1 month ish, within a week, give or take, of our story coming out on November 8th about the person that we think is a forensic match to the pipe bomber. The FBI re-upped that. Now, it had originally been offered during the Christopher Wray directorship administration of the FBI. Now, at this point, we've been under the Kash Patel, Dan Bongino administration for 8-9 months at this point, and it gets re-upped again. Now, by the way, I happen to have 3 different sources that were inside the meeting in a congressional office where the suggestion was made to the FBI in that meeting, you guys really ought to re-up that thing, because they were at a dead end. The Kash Patel administration, the Dan Bongino top 3 priority pipe bomber situation, they had nothing. So it was actually former Chief Stephen Sund, who was in this meeting, who suggested you guys need to re-up this award or reward. And they're like, really, why do you think that is? He said, because the country's forgotten about it. It's old news. Sure enough, a week later, after this meeting, there's a fresh new 7.5 minute video. They add a few more seconds of the pipe bomber into this dissertation, and it's a 7.5 minute plea for leads to the public yet again, with the 800 number and all of that. So this comes out a month before our story does. That means that the FBI still hasn't a clue. Or they do know, and they have no intention of doing anything with it anyway. But at the recommendation of former Chief Police Sund, in this meeting that was being led by a briefing by a Hoover 7th floor person, I have 3 sources that have confirmed the contents of that meeting, that suggestion was made. They take the suggestion. $500,000 reward is re-upped. This happens, and I think this is coincidentally. I don't believe that this is anything other than a coincidence. At the same time, now I'm looking at a particular character. 1 month later, our story comes out. There's no way that unless a great lead came in from this new upping of the $500,000 reward, that they knew to put surveillance on Brian Cole Jr.'s home 5 days after our story came out. Our story came out on November 8th. Surveillance was placed on his home on November 13th. Now, we then learned a month later when he was arrested that in fact there was no information. They said it in the press conference on the evening of Brian Cole Jr.'s arrest that they did not get new information, new leads from anywhere. They just went back to the vault. Or as one current sitting FBI agent told me, they went to their Patsy file. That's his quote, not mine. This is a known whistleblower, by the way, still an employee of the FBI. And they went back and pulled out a suspect that they had looked at 4.5 years prior, over almost 5 years prior, and said, yeah, this one's close enough. Let's go get him. So then they put surveillance on his home for a month before they arrested him. And then everything gets really, really weird after that.
Yeah, and I remember reading an article about the cell phone data that apparently was corrupted. We remember right in the aftermath of J6, I believe it was Stephen D'Antuono, however you say his name, who was, I think, the special agent in charge in DC.
Yeah, he
And
was the
giving
what they call the ADIC, the assistant director in charge.
assistant director. Yeah, and thank you for the correction. But he came out, I think, repeatedly. We had the videos where he would say some of the cell phone footage was corrupted, and we really can't, geo-target or identify certain groups of people. And then I think one of the big breaks was that they wrote some software or something, and then were able to reconfigure, piece together the broken data, and then in that data, that was the new, break. That's where they started to then say that we could connect this back to Brian Cole, and that launched the whole thing. But for about 4.5 years up until that point, it was just dead on arrival.
Yeah, for 4.5 years, FBI claimed, I mean, openly and adamantly in congressional testimonies and otherwise, was that the cell phone data was corrupted, right, and that those files were just no longer available to them. At the same time, the cell phone carriers were going, bullshit, that's not true.
Yeah, it makes no sense. They're in the business of data. They transmit data. It's part of their entire process. So to just say that on that one key day, at that one moment, all of this data is perverted, it made no sense at all. We all thought that is a strange coincidence that you can't look into that.
And then suddenly there's a Brian Cole arrest, and suddenly, hell, how about that? It wasn't corrupt. We've got cell phone tower pings from his phone. That magically, perfect timing.
Yeah, and it happened pretty quickly, and nobody got paid their reward, so they just looked back into their own evidence, and suddenly they pull a rabbit out of the hat.
I mean, that's exactly what happened. So, and we don't have to do this, in a strict timeline. We'll get to the court cases however you want to and as quickly as you want to, but just to kind of lead us up to Brian Cole's arrest. So they put surveillance on him for a solid month before they make the arrest. All right. So this is a kid who is high functioning, very intelligent, bright, autistic young man. Highly OCD, insanely habitual, creature of habit. He does everything the same way, every day, same time, almost to the level of the Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman character, 5 Minutes to Wapner guy. And that's who Brian Cole is, which means if they watched him walk the neighborhood 2 to 3 times per day on a strict routine schedule, always in the middle of the winter, wearing shorts and Crocs, regardless of the temperature. He always wears shorts and Crocs. Walks quite some distance in his neighborhood to the 7-Eleven. Always walks to the 7-Eleven, and every day for 13 years, the 7-Eleven store owner, the franchise owner, told me that he had seen this kid in his store every day for 13 years, and that Brian Cole Jr. always bought the same thing every time he walked in the store: 2 Coca-Colas and a pizza.
Nice.
Okay. This is what this kid does 2 to 3 times a day. And then on the day of his arrest, they scoop him up on one of his walks back home. So he's got his bag of 7-Eleven purchased items, is when they scoop him up and take him in for that interrogation. But they had been watching this creature of habit and routine for all of this time, gathering data on him. They had to know that he was a special needs individual. Just looking at him, and also he always had his head, 1,000% of the time, he's wearing his headphones. His dog had just passed away. That for years the dog was part of the routine. The dog had just passed away before the surveillance had started, and so that part of the routine was broken. But every other characteristic that you would examine of this young man would show you an investigator, a professional investigator, people who have to actually knowledgeably take into account that special needs individuals on the spectrum, particularly individuals with autism, give the highest rate of false confessions of any other demographic. These are pros, right? They're supposed to know that. So when they scooped him up and we get into the interrogation, the interview that same day after they arrested him, we learn subsequently that he went through that entire 4 hours without an attorney present. Oh, well, he waived his Miranda. Yeah, but you already know who he is and what type of individual he is. This case is going to anger a DC jury from the jump, from the get-go. Then it gets really weird. So at the same time the arrest is taking place, the raid on the Cole family home is taking place, right? So here comes the SWAT teams and the bomb teams and everybody swoops in. They live in a cul-de-sac. I've been to the family home. I've spent time with the family in the home. They, in a bomb suspect case, always, they evacuate the neighborhood. At least next door neighbors, and if in they're a cul-de-sac, they clear the street. They clear the cul-de-sac out. They didn't. They did not evacuate the homes. In fact, they locked the people that were home into their homes and wouldn't allow them to leave. Next door to the Cole family is a 70-year-old couple. He had a doctor's appointment that morning, and they wouldn't even let him go to the doctor's appointment. They locked them in their homes. So you have this guy suspected of building weapons of mass destruction, and they lock their neighbors into their homes, completely out of standard operating protocols for the FBI.
It's because there was some contention on that, just in terms of even what they found within the pipe bomb, whether there was even viability of these devices that they picked up. I think the FBI said that they were viable, that they could explode, and then other reports have said, I think the defense attorneys have said, not really. There was materials in there that might actually mimic a test device, or kind of like a prop if you're using for training, so that law enforcement could actually drop these off and then train a dog or something to come sniff and identify this thing. So it looks like a pipe bomb, but it's not actually a viable device. And in other words, even if Brian Cole did concoct these things, there's a question about whether or not they could explode.
Well, one of the things about those devices is that publicly and privately, every single person we have ever interviewed within the federal complex who has bomb making, their explosives, EOD types from whether it's FBI retired, current FBI, DOD, ATF, go down the line. They all look at these two devices and go, yeah, those are training devices. That's what this is exactly the design that we use when we're training. And then you get into the deeper investigation and analysis and interviews that we've done with people involved directly with the investigation. And they tell us that internally the FBI informed the investigators that these devices were in fact inert. Now, that's not what the FBI has ever said publicly. Either the Ray FBI or the Patel FBI have always contended that they were viable devices.
Yeah, and who knows what that means, whether it could ignite and then kind of, pitter out, just put some dust out or something, or whether it would reach a critical threshold and explode and actually injure anybody. But we looked at the devices, and if I'm not mistaken, there was only a 60-minute timer on there. So even if these were planted the night before, as it looks like they were, it would, they would have gone off within 60 minutes. And there was like a weird trigger device where I think a paper clip was super glued to the kitchen timer, and it was supposed to ding and then close the circuit, something like that. And then also Kamala Harris and her motorcade pulled up to the DNC, while my understanding is the actual one of the devices was sitting in the bushes out there. Secret Service would have come and swept everything, and they didn't find it.
Yeah. The Secret Service bomb squad team, including dogs, had been surveyed. Well, they had come in and done their, first of all, they had done a human search of the entire exterior of the building. You know, as they do. She was the vice president elect on that day. And so that entire property was completely searched by, we captured on camera at like, I don't want to get the time wrong, but it was either 8:30 in the morning or 9:30 in the morning. We could see 8 or 9 Secret Service agencies actually doing that search. The dogs were brought in twice on video. We can see the dogs searching that area. So if it was a viable device, the dogs missed it twice.
Right.
But it wasn't just that the dogs missed it. The DNC bot device was in the open. It was, any human could see it.
Right on top of the bushes in that corner behind the bench, right?
It wasn't even, there was no attempt to even hide it. And even in the FBI criminal complaint, they say that Brian Cole Jr. said during his interrogation, his confession, that when he took the bomb out of the backpack, that he then set the timer before placing it behind the bench, kind of in the mulch, you know, up against the bushes there. Except that the video contradicts that itself. This is another one of those issues where the FBI tells us something that's not so, because Hoodie reaches into the backpack with one hand, pulls the device out, leans over, and places the device. Never brings the other hand over to set the timer.
Yeah, interesting. And it was 60 minutes, right? So it would have gone off that night, not conveniently been found right about noon, 1 o'clock, 12:30, whenever the time was the following day, at the most critical moment of the entire J6 saga, so that all of the resources get pulled away from the Capitol to go address these devices.
Yeah, this is one, the coincidences of timing are too large to dismiss as accidental. The laws of probability don't allow for this. The first device was discovered at roughly 12:35, 12:40 over at the RNC. It was actually behind the Capitol Hill Club, which is next door to the RNC. It was found next to a trash can, and it was in between a trash can and a rat trap, right up against a fence gate. And this was found by a lady by the name of Carlin Younger. She immediately ran over to the guard shack that is behind the RNC, notified the guard. I've actually interviewed that guard myself. And then in addition to that, immediately the police, or the security inside the RNC, were notified, then police were notified. And so roughly sometime between 12:40 and 1 o'clock, the alarm went off on Capitol Police radio that they had a suspicious device at the RNC, and they had to divert already severely limited resources from the defense of the Capitol. This was just before the breach. Now look at the timing. 12:35 to 12:40. When's the first breach take place? The famous Ray Epps breach, where Ray Epps leans over, whispers in Ryan Samsel's ear. 2 seconds later, Samsel spins around to the gate and rushes the bike rack, knocks it over, and Officer Carolyn Edwards. First blood was Carolyn Edwards concussing against the concrete steps when Ryan Samsel knocked her over. Okay? That was the ignition point for the day, for the violence of the day. And what took place, as I said, was the coincidence of the timing. The bomb is discovered. Less than 10 minutes later, the first breach happens. The second bomb is discovered now, allegedly discovered, because it's off camera, we can't see it, at 1:05, so 5 minutes after. Well, what's important about this timeline right there? There's two important things that are taking place at this timeline. The first thing is that 1 o'clock was the exact moment that the gavel drops in the joint session of Congress, when Vice President Pence calls that session into order in order to begin the debate and the confirmation of the Electoral College vote. That's what's happening. It's a ceremonial day. It's a constitutional day. It's a big day. It's a day where it's supposed to be, by Capitol Police standard operating procedure, it's supposed to be what they call an all boots on the ground day. There's 2,000, and January 6th at that time in 2021, there were 2,000 roughly uniformed Capitol Police officers who should have all been on duty that day. There was only less than 250
Wild.
on site. And then you have the diversionary devices are discovered minutes either side of 1 o'clock by coincidence. They sat there for 17 hours. Now, at the RNC or Capitol Hill Club, that device could have gone 17 hours without being seen. There's no possible way that the DNC device was not seen. We believe that that device did not show up until it was discovered, that it had been moved. That's another story.
Yeah, and there was a lot of back and forth on that in terms of resources. Obviously, Trump wrote a letter to Muriel Bowser or made a suggestion to deploy the National Guard out. She responded to him and said, absolutely not. There was a whole media frenzy about that, saying if Trump is able to help secure the premises, then that will lead to him stealing the government, like a takeover by, the incoming dictator. So they rejected a lot of the additional support. And then we've also got on the other end, we've got the Capitol Hill chief of police, former now, Stephen Sund, who wrote about it in his book, where he explained that he was calling and calling and calling. And he put together this graph on this chart on X at one point where he just went through the time, this time. I was making requests over to the Senate and the House Sergeant at Arms so that they could help get approval to get additional resources here. And he was just ignored. Essentially, he was, declined on the phone call one after another while this all was escalating. So it's like they did not explicitly approve these additional resources because maybe they wanted this to happen as an exit plan for the president to lead to the second impeachment, to prevent any actual debate on the House floor or the Senate floor about the rigging of the election, and enabled this whole thing to go down.
Well, former Chief Sund's timelines have all been corroborated. I know that there was a lot of skepticism and even some naysayers from the mainstream media about his own version of events and how they went down. But these are very tightly controlled records. I mean, we're talking about phone records, we're talking about logs, we're talking about conversations that happen at the highest levels of government, which are all tracked and all logged, and they've all been corroborated, even by Nancy Pelosi's original January 6th select committee. So these are all indisputable. And one of the things that Stephen Sund said was that these devices were, in fact, the only logical reason that they were discovered minutes either side of 1 o'clock was that they were diversions from an already severely depleted force at the Capitol. Now, there was another thing that was taking place at 1 o'clock that's also of equal, if not greater significance, and that is this, is the president had screwed up the timelines of the day already. Now, I know a lot of people don't know this, but the president was not originally scheduled to speak or participate on January 6th. The organizers of the rally, which had already been permitted, the permits had already been applied for and issued for January 6th before his announcement to speak. He announced on December 19th, remember, famous announcement, come join us in DC. It's going to be wild.
Yeah,
that phrase has been used against him. Well, those permits and the rallies had already been scheduled. In fact, there were over 80, Robert, over 80 First Amendment protest events had been secured and approved for all variety of groups, protest organizations, events, rallies, marches for the days of January 5th and January 6th. Over 80 permits. The Capitol Police themselves had approved and signed off on 6 separate permits for events to take place on the Capitol grounds, all to begin at 1 p.m. 1 p.m. There's that magical 1 p.m. The president screwed up the timeline because he was supposed to take the stage at the Ellipse at 11 a.m. He did not even walk onto the stage until 11:57. So he's an hour late. And he was supposed to have been finished by noon. Then that, by all of the rally and permit organizers or protest organizers, there was going to be then the march from the Ellipse and the Washington Monument lawn to take place, a march from there to the Capitol, an hour in between, and then those other events were supposed to take place. At some of those events, one in particular, even members of Congress were scheduled to speak on stages with PA systems on the Capitol lawn. This is all in the public record. And, well, the president didn't take the stage till an hour late, and then he didn't leave the stage till 1:16. So now everything is all screwed up. So the timing of the discovery of the bombs that's screwed up. They don't know the provocateurs who are supposed to make this breach at 1 p.m. or thereabouts. They're like, I don't know. So you get the first bomb discovered. Damn it, the president's still on the stage. Ray Epps leans over and whispers in Samsel's ear. He breaches it at 12:52, 12:53. Boom, they're up on the lower West Terrace at, just before 1 o'clock. And before the president even leaves the stage, Capitol Police commander panics. There's no violence, severe violence. There's some pushing and shoving going on. But a Capitol Police commander panics and orders the launch of less lethals on the crowd. And now people are angry, they're mad, and the fighting really begins at that point.
Yeah, because there's Capitol officers who were up on the terrace who were shooting down into the crowd, essentially, is basically what we heard in the Proud Boys trial. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's also footage, right, of Shawnee Kirkhoff herself, who was there on the day with what looks like a less than lethal, looks like a paintball gun,
yeah,
who's actually up there on the terrace doing that, presumably.
Yeah, we've released footage. We did a story about that. That's why I said this. We were working a story up on the use of the criminally negligent use of less lethal devices on the crowd that day when I discovered the other thing, as we previously discussed.
All right. Yeah, that's interesting. So, yeah, I do have these subpoenas queued up. I think maybe it might make sense. We've already talked about some of the evidence that the government is alleging against Brian Cole. So we talked about the confession. I think, confessions are coerced and made under duress all the time. Yeah. You have, a lot of case law and experience with that, across the legal system. That's not an anomaly. Then you add in the fact that he's, autistic. He's somebody that seemingly has OCD. And they just kind of hammer him, seed these things. Eventually, they say that he was not confessing for, I think, a while, and then turns around and then says, okay, fine, I did it, which, mirrors a lot of other cases with false confessions. So that's one of the big elements that they say. Well, he confessed to the whole thing, so he must have done it. That, I think, is explainable. Anything to add to that one element?
Well, there's the problem is that there's items in the confession itself that the FBI themselves have published that aren't backed up by the actual real evidence on the ground. I already discussed one of them. According to the FBI, he confessed to setting the timer as he placed the device at the DNC. Well, the hooded bomber did not do that. So therefore, Brian Cole Jr. did not do that. The second thing that doesn't work is that, according to his confession, is that he confesses to the FBI that he planned his route around the RNC and the DNC specifically, very specifically says that he used Google Maps to schedule and plan his route that day. All right. Well, there's two things that you cannot see on Google Maps, even from satellite view. You cannot see where the Capitol Police cameras are. Therefore, you don't know where the blind spots are. Therefore, you don't know where to park your car in a blind spot. then suddenly appear at 7:34 p.m. on the street carrying a single device, go to the DNC, plant it, go back to your car at the blind spot, and either go to your car or to your accomplice sitting in a car with the second device, reload your backpack, and then traverse over to the DNC, plant that device, and then exit from the Rumsey Court alleyway behind the RNC through a hidden gate. A hidden gate's not on Google Maps. You cannot see it from satellite view or street cam view or any other view. It does not exist on the map. So there's nothing on Google Maps that says, okay, these are Capitol Police CCTV blind spots. And there's nothing on the map that says, oh, by the way, there's a secret gate here where you can disappear into a church garden, which is also in a blind spot, and have your accomplice pick you up there.
Yeah, it was interesting how they couldn't pick the person up and then lost the person on the way out. And when we were watching the videos, it definitely looked like this person had a mission, like they were walking around with some intention. There were some moments in the videos where they would stop, kind of check their phone, walk one way, check the phone, go back the other way. There was also, it looked like to me in one of the videos, like maybe even a text message or something was being sent from the cell phone, maybe to somebody else. Don't know if they were Googling something or searching for something while they were seated there. And then we saw the one that always stuck out to us. And from the very beginning, we thought it was a female just based on how this person was walking before your reporting or anything. We used to joke that it was Liz Cheney marching around the corner because of like this hip swing that was going on. So, turn the corner and like
the left all said it was, the left said it was, they all said it was MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene. That was the big thing. Everybody on the left said, oh, that was Marjorie Taylor Greene because she was a new congressman and she planted the bombs, blah, blah, blah.
So yeah, the camera footage, the pickup, the drop off, all of that was very curious. And I think that also might lead us to another bit of evidence that they're alleging against him, which would be the license plate reader, right? So they said that his car was there and these license plate readers picked him up right around the same time. I think there's a couple ways to challenge evidence. Obviously, one, you can challenge the validity of the evidence that's being alleged. So, if you say, oh, we've got DNA evidence, you say, well, the DNA test was bad, so it gave you a bad result, so that evidence is not reliable. Or you can have an alternative explanation for the evidence if it is valid. Well, of course, my DNA is on there. I use that every day, but I didn't use it for that purpose or for this reason. And so I was wondering, do we have any insight on that? And I know right now, the case is very early, so the defense is keeping a lot of this close to the vest here and has not really communicated a lot. We've read a lot of their filings and, they're digging into the subpoenas that we'll get to in a moment. But do we have any insight into that? Is he, driving a DoorDash? Is he, was he there for some other purpose, visiting somebody, or any explanation for that bit of evidence that we know?
Yeah. Okay. So now that we're getting into the legal case side of things, whether it's Brian Cole case or my case, I'm being obviously sued by Shawnee Kirkhoff in a defamation lawsuit. So I'll just put this precursor out there. It's not a disclaimer because I'm not afraid to talk about anything. The bottom line is that I have consulted Brian Cole Jr.'s attorneys at length. Myself and my team, you understand, we have years into video analysis here. They're just getting started since, December.
Right.
So they're way, way behind what we know. But now the tables are turning because they're getting access to discovery that I've only dreamed about getting my hands on. So now they're learning more than we know, but they can't yet share that with me because it's under the court seal until it becomes evidence, as you know. That's just the process.
Right.
All right. So they know things I don't know. We still are briefing them on things that we know. They still call us to get, so what have you seen here? And it's interesting. They'll call me and say, so what did you see at this time or this place on this corner or whatever on this camera? What have you guys seen in this time frame? And so we'll tell them. And of course, obviously I'm like, so why are you asking about that spot in that time? Well, we can't tell you. And so, and they're I'll be honest with you, it's very frustrating for me, but they are absolutely adhering to the court rules and not sharing that information. The only thing that I will add to that is that in my case, the civil case, 90% of the discovery is going to be the same. It's the same exact video that we're going to be bringing in for discovery that they have. Everything is going to be the same. It's going to be at least a 90% crossover in the cases. And so I'm eventually going to get to see all of this. And this is why I'm Robert, there's no other way to say it. I'm excited about this. I'm excited about this case.
Yeah, and I think a lot's going to be revealed, and it's an interesting little litigation problem maybe for both sides. The fact that you're now being sued civilly by Shawnee Kirkhoff, and the conversation, the litigation about that is going to reveal facts and evidence, presumably, that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to get out or even really discuss outside of the criminal case,
right?
Because of the seal and the lockdown. So you've got these kind of two competing cases here and two different standards. One's criminal, one's civil. And, you know, you've now got a right to defend yourself against these allegations. Brian Cole Jr. does, obviously, as well. But we may learn something in the one civil case that might be helpful in the criminal case and vice versa.
I was sitting in the courtroom in the last hearing on the Brian Cole Jr. case. This was the hearing about a month ago where they actually set the date for the trial. In fact, that was the only big news that came out of that hearing, was that there was an agreed upon trial date, which will take place in begin in mid-February, 27. So, but in the last 15 minutes of that hearing, the judge very calmly, nonchalantly, matter-of-factly, in a very reserved and accepting sort of way, said, he discussed the fact that, you know, we have a parallel case happening in the civil realm at the same time we're doing this criminal thing. And it's already created some problems for us, is because in the other case, they're releasing information into the public domain that I would have never allowed to be released, that would have been under the court seal. And he said, and he was just he was extremely calm about it. He wasn't angry. He just said, this, you know, it is what it is, and we're going to have to deal with it and take it as it comes, not knowing that the subject of the other case is sitting in his courtroom at the time.
Yeah. And it's going to be curious because she's got to make certain allegations, and in those allegations, she's got to reveal some evidence to substantiate her allegations. And that will be new areas for you to key off on, and for the defense then to say, we actually, you know, have information that's different than that. And so I can see why he is frustrated with that. But okay, so we're going to come back to Shawnee and to her boyfriend. I don't know if they're still together, and her doctor, because we've got 3 subpoenas I wanted to get to and share. But there were also just a couple other bits of evidence, and I don't know how much you can talk about this, but I just wanted to flesh it out just so that we have kind of a clear picture of what the government's evidence is against him, which I thought was pretty weak, really. With the confession, they referenced the deleted cell phone repeatedly. They said he kept wiping his cell phone over and over and over. To me, that feels consistent with somebody who has OCD, who just,
it's a very consistent thing.
Phone. And my brother has Down syndrome, and he's got very repetitive things that he does over and over and over again, no matter what you do to explain you don't need to do that. And a lot of the weird stuff with his phone, he just does weird stuff with his phone. And so that, I think, is explainable, not necessarily as an evidence of a cover up or obstruction. I mean, I think if he really wanted to hide what he had done there, he would just go get a new cell phone, for example, rather than just wiping it like 1,000 times or whatever the number was.
And I know all about that too, because as I've said, I've spent an immense amount of time with the family interviewing them about Brian, who he is, his habits, his mindset, the way he thinks, why he does this thing. Why does he reset the phone to factory settings 900 times? If he's hiding evidence in his phone, why does he leave bomb making materials in his car for 5 years?
Right. Yeah. And that's the other big one that a lot of people reference. They say, oh, he's got, galvanized pipe. He's got these end caps. He's got wires and 9-volt batteries. And I know that, at one point in my life, I was doing construction. And before I went to law school, I was building swimming pools. And part of my job, and I had a truck at the time, but I also would drive these things around, a company truck, but I would also drive around in my Toyota Camry with galvanized pipe and end caps, because I would be installing spa heaters at the side of pools and then running pipes in there. And so I could have easily been pulled over, and I would have had basically all of the main components there, wiring, 9-volt batteries, multiple different lengths of pipes. And part of my thought process when they then did the analysis on the pipes that they picked up on that day on January 6th that were dropped on J5 is whether they came from the same batch, whether, the materials were the same, because they run, these things in batches, and the composition of the pipes would be very similar. I think you'd be able to identify a group of pipes. Let's say you go into Home Depot, you pick up, 8, 9, 10 different 8-inch pipes. Those should have some similarity together because they were created in the same batch, versus a pipe that was purchased on 2020 versus all the way back in 2018. I think there'll be a material composition that's a little bit different that you could forensically identify. And so, it'd be very interesting if the pipes that they picked up actually, forensically matched the pipes that they found in his property. And I don't think I've seen anything that says that or supports that. I do know that there were no fingerprints. There was no DNA. I think there was no other real forensic connection that we've seen thus far that's been alleged.
Going back to the actual pipe bomb themselves, the two devices themselves, the FBI actually intervened in the Capitol Police Bomb Squad and ordered the destruction of those devices when this is not what Capitol Police Standard Operating Procedure is. Capitol Police had on the scene, we have it on camera, the actual containment unit that they carry on a trailer. It's a really thick, hardened steel containment unit that the bomb robot would take the device, pick it up, and place it inside the containment unit that closed the unit. And then they would take the bomb to the FBI Quantico lab, because that would be the standard operating procedure, because Quantico has the best, science in that space. So that's where they would take the devices, and that's typical standard Capitol Police operating procedure. But the FBI bomb supervisor on the ground that day ordered Capitol Police technicians to hit those devices with a secondary explosive charge to destroy the evidence on site. That's new. I haven't revealed that publicly before.
So there really is no way for the defense to examine the murder weapon, so-called, to make any forensic connection to exonerate them.
This is what I'm told by the actual bomb experts. I'm told that they are able to recover somewhere between 40 and 50% of all devices. They're able to recover fingerprints and or other types of DNA evidence from these devices. They recovered 0 from either device. They should have had a 50-50 shot, 2 devices, at least one of them, they should have gotten something from. But because of the actions that the FBI took on site that day, that it destroyed their ability to actually recover any evidence whatsoever. And what they also did is they lost in one of the devices, there was no more explosive powder or chemical compound remaining after the intervention that the FBI command ordered on site that day. That was destroyed. They did find some explosive material in one of the other devices still remained, but they do not have any. They have it's impossible because of what they hit these devices with. It's an actual explosive water cannon. Imagine a shotgun shell that has water in it, which then hits it at such a high rate of speed, it interrupts all the circuitry and interrupts the ability of the device to actually detonate. Well, after hitting it the first time, and they did this on both devices, the FBI, at this point is where typically the Capitol Police would recover the device, but the FBI ordered them to be completely destroyed again, or hit again with those water cannons. And as a result, they lost their evidence. But they have no idea whether there was enough material inside those pipes to even detonate. there was typically in a training device, they only put enough explosive material in to trigger the dogs. The point being, it's a training device.
Right. So no real other forensic connection that ties Brian Cole to the bombs. Okay. No fingerprints, no DNA, or even a materials analysis that would, match something that was in his possession.
Well, let's go back to as far as the materials needed to build a explosive device of that type, a quote unquote pipe bomb. And the materials that were discovered at his home and or in his car. These items had been purchased over a period of years. Even the purchase history contradicts some of the confession made as to why he purchased this stuff. He was upset about the election, except the election didn't happen until November of 2020, and he was making purchases in 2018. He was actually making purchases of these types of components long before that, because Brian Cole Jr. had a fascination, even as a teenager, with model rocketry. So a lot of these same components would have been purchased for that, particularly these long 500-foot spools of wire, when you only needed 2 feet of wire to build 2 devices, but you purchase spools that are 500 feet long. Well, there's a reason for that. If you've ever built model rockets, you're detonating them from a long ways away. So you run your wiring all the way out to the rocket where it is, and you get as far away from it as you can in case it accidentally explodes. So there's the problem that the FBI is going to have to overcome there, is how much of that overlaps with his model rocketry fascination that he had for many years. The testimony or the confession does not comport with the timing of the purchase. Also, the problem that they have in the purchase of some of these components, and this is the big one, is that some of the absolutely necessary components to make it a bomb were not purchased until after January 6th, according to his purchase records. The next big problem that they're going to have is that the FBI claims that these materials were purchased with a total of 6 different credit cards. But Brian Cole Jr. has only ever had 3 cards in his life. He has his bank account card, he has a separate bank credit card, and then he has a Best Buy Visa. Those are the only 3 cards that he's ever owned, ever possessed in his entire life. And yet these purchase records are shown to have been made over 6 different cards. I'll be very interested to hear how they're going to explain that. Additionally,
I'm wondering if they're just going to say that it's family, and I think I heard you on another interview, maybe with Viva, talking about, like a hat that he doesn't wear and, certain things that he doesn't own. Do you think the government will just say, well, he pulled that from his family member, pulled that from his dad, got mom's credit card? Okay. Do we know whether the credit cards are, family members, or are these kind of other unnamed individuals or items?
We don't know yet. And to be honest with you, and this is again another one of those, it's not a disclaimer. Everything, I'm not afraid to speak on anything.
Sure.
There are a few things that the attorneys have asked me not to disclose that I know, not that I've learned from them, but I've done, like I said, I've been working on this for over 4 years. And there are still things that I know that I have disclosed to them that they've said, please sit on that, because we need it to develop the case. And then, so in regards to some of those type of technical evidentiary issues, I have to be really careful about what I know and what I can disclose and what I can't disclose. But the bottom line is that I know some things about the credit card purchases I can't talk about. I also know some things about his medical condition that I've not been hesitant to talk about. And one of those things related to his OCD spectrum issues is that, as a creature of habit, there's also things that he doesn't like to feel, right? One of the things he's never done is worn a hat. He never owned a ball cap. He's never worn a watch and never owned a watch. The Pice Bomber is wearing a smartwatch. Um, he doesn't wear and can't wear dark glasses because he has such a severe eyesight deficiency and a severe prescription for his glasses. And yet we know that the FBI believes that the pipe bomber was wearing dark sunglasses. Why do we know this? Because in their seizure list, which I have a copy of, it's an inventory list of everything they seized from the home. They seized dark sunglasses. You don't take dark sunglasses unless you believe they're, germane to the evidence. We also know that they seized his mother's Apple Watch, something he's never worn. He's never worn a watch. He wears no jewelry at all. The only thing that Brian Cole Jr. habitually wears is headphones, and he wears a lanyard that he keeps his keys on because he loses his keys. So he always has his keys on a lanyard around his neck. And then when he can't wear his headphones, because that's kind of his security blanket, as it were, he wears a very thick leather pouch that he attaches to his lanyard, his keychain, that has his gamer earbuds in, so he can play. So when, like for instance, when he goes to work, he's not allowed to wear his headphones at work. He works for his dad, and his dad's bail bondsman business. Has, he does like data entry and other, things like that. And so his dad makes him wear nice clothes to work. He has to wear jeans and a nice shirt, and he has to wear regular shoes. He's not allowed to wear his Crocs to work. So he typically wears his Converse Chucks to work. And when he gets home, the first thing he does is he strips off, puts on a t-shirt, puts on shorts, and puts on his Crocs. But he always has his keychain around his neck on that lanyard. And the pipe bomber is wearing a ball cap under the hoodie. Now, this ball cap is not meant to disguise or because you can only see just the tip of the bill of the cap underneath the hoodie. All right. So we know that the cap is not needed as a mastermind criminal disguise device. The disguise is already happening because the hoodie's already there. And the hoodie covers 99% of the ball cap anyway. We also know that the headphones are not under the hoodie because there's no imprint from that. We also know that the lanyard is not underneath the hoodie because there's no imprint from the thick keychain and the pouch of these are all habits of a highly OCD, on the spectrum young man that are suddenly being violated. We also know that the bomber is wearing a watch. Brian Cole Jr. has never worn a watch in his life. We also know that the bomber is wearing dark sunglasses, and we also know that the bomber has much better eyesight than Brian Cole Jr. does, because in all of the photography of Brian Cole Jr., he always holds his phone right here, 6 to 8 inches from his face so that he can see the phone. The bomber sits down at the DNC bench and holds the phone in the lap.
Yeah, and we saw that. I think you dug up the body cam footage from a traffic stop, and we played that here where Brian Cole, after even speaking with the officers, he's back at the car, kind of leaning on the car, and it's right in front of his face. It doesn't seem to match what we saw in the video of the bomber.
I have his eyesight prescription. It's 5 pages long. My prescription for my progressive glasses here is this long. That's the length of my prescription. His is 5 pages. His eyesight is so severe. And he is not walking around in DC at night with dark sunglasses on to obscure his identity and a ball cap, not wearing his headphones, not wearing his shorts, not wearing his Crocs, completely violating all of his habits as a, autistic individual. And for that 45-minute period, he changes everything because he's such a criminal mastermind that he knows where all the blind spots are in the CCTV cameras around the city. And he knows where the secret gate is that empties into a dark, unlit church garden so that he can disappear into the night. Look, I'll just say this. We can get into the court cases if you want to spend the time on it. Brian Cole Jr. is not the person walking around DC that night planting the devices. If you want to make the argument that he somehow was groomed and delivered the devices to the individual that actually planted them, and that's why his car was in the area, I'll go there. I'll go down that path with you. All right. If you want to make the argument that that was what he was, that's why he had the bomb making components. But then you're going to have to accept, and you're going to have to argue that he was in a conspiracy with somebody who really knew what was going on, like somebody in law enforcement or somebody in the intelligence community, somebody in government that would know where the blind spots were in the cameras and told him where to park the car so his car couldn't be seen. You're going to have to make that argument that he had assistance from a government source in order to pull this off and to remain undiscovered for 5 years. And you can also make the argument that I've gotten my person of interest number one wrong in Shawnee Kirkhoff as the person who forensically has a very high degree of similarity to the gray hooded pipe bomber. You can tell me I've got that wrong. I mean, according to the software, it's a 94% match. That's not 100%. According to the experts, it's a 98% match. That's not 100%. You can make the argument I got that wrong, and I'm with you all day long on that. Okay? The one thing you cannot convince me of is that Brian Cole Jr. planted those devices. He is not the person walking around that night for 1,000 different reasons that we can prove. And it's those reasonable doubts that are going to make it impossible for a DC jury to convict him.
Yeah, we had questions about that. I mean, we watched the body cam footage of the traffic stops of Brian Cole Jr. My wife and I went down to a hearing earlier on in the case at the DC District Court to hear them debate about, I think it was a detention hearing at the time. So we got to see Brian Cole kind of walk in and walk back out. Mm-hmm. He's kind of got a stiffer gait around him. He's kind of, kind of tight, like you would imagine somebody with autism has, versus what we saw on video of this hoodied person who was seemingly a lot more loose and fluid and kind of limber than anything that I've seen from him. And I think that there's a human capability, and I could be wrong about that too, but when you go to a mall, you go to a theme park or something, and you can kind of see the back of your friend's head or your wife's head or something and kind of just see how they're moving. And maybe the first thing that sticks out is the walk, is how they are, their cadence and their steps. All of that can trigger, I think, a reaction. But we also, I think, don't even have, there was a backpack that was carried around that day. There were shoes that the FBI identified, I believe, that this hooded bomber was wearing. And none of that was also even recovered from Brian Cole's residence. So there was, very little that actually connects him to that scene or any of the images that we saw in the footage.
Right. According to the family, he has never owned a pair of Nike Air Max Speed Turf 2018 model shoes. Never owned a pair of those shoes. His preferred shoes are Crocs, and he wears the Nike Converse Chucks. I'm not Nike, but the Converse Chucks when he has to. He has two identical pair of those. I've held them and others of his shoes. Every pair of shoes that Brian Cole Jr. owns, except for the Crocs that he was wearing that day when he was arrested, I've held in my hands, and they are all size 12s. We have measured the bomber's foot as to be a size 9 to a 9.5.
Yeah, and you made a great video about that. You went out there, and there's one area of the route that this person took where the bricks in the ground essentially are visible. So you can see how the foot lands on the pavement because there's lines in between the various bricks. And you just went out there and you measured it. You put a size 12, you put a size 9 together. One looks a lot more like it reflects what was seen in the footage, which was a smaller foot.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. This was a very easy, it doesn't take rocket surgery to do what we did back there in the bricks on Rumsey Court, is because we got a couple of even with the frame rate reduced footage. There's really good lighting in this section of Rumsey Court, and there was sufficient enough lighting that even at 1 frame per second, a couple of times, one of the feet landed perfectly on the back edge of a brick. And then it crossed over to two full bricks and then a little less than a half a brick. So I was able just to go out there with a ruler, a tape measure, and measure the distance between the heel and by the way, the exact bricks that Hoodie stepped on.
Right.
And measure that and then determine by acquiring actual copies of those shoes. I purchased a 9.5, a size 10.5, and a size 12 of the 2018 edition of Nike Air Max Speed Turf shoes. And the difference between shoe length from the exterior can be very different depending upon not just shoe size, but the outsole versus the insole size. And these Nike Air Max shoes have a very large outsole. So you have to actually know the shoe. So you have to have the shoe. And so what we were able to determine is that the 9.5 is the closest one of the three that I purchased to the distance of the foot in the shoe that landed on those bricks. So I can tell that that the hooded bomber was either wearing a size 9 to a 9.5, but all of Brian's shoes are size 12s. He did not shove his size 12 foot into a size 9 shoe and walk around for an hour outside the Capitol.
All right. So to recap, we've got explanations. The government is alleging that there was a deleted cell phone over and over, wiped and wiped again. So we know that that could be attributed to OCD versus anything that's part of an attempt to cover up his tracks. He could, have been doing that, but somebody with OCD, that would be behavior that you would expect to be from them. We've got the cell phone data that was newly uncovered by the feds. It was corrupted for about 4.5 years. Then they reconstitute it after somebody writes some computer code. All that takes place right after you guys identify an alternative suspect. And lo and behold, boom, evidence comes out. We've now made this connection and something that we couldn't see before. Now suddenly we can see, and it implicates this guy. We have the confession, which is explainable by the fact that he's, got autism and he was under duress for several hours, initially made a whole slew of denials, then made the confession, okay, I did it. But in the confession, some of the things that he admitted to don't actually corroborate with the record. And so they're unreliable just based on what he actually said. We've got materials explanations. This could be something that was connected to a hobby that didn't have all of the actual necessary components to assemble the bombs that day based on the receipts. The receipts are questionable because we have apparently maybe a broader scope of attribution. You've got these 6 cards that are being attributed to him where he only had 3 cards. So maybe they just expanded the scope on that. Some of the purchases go all the way back to 2018. Some of the other purchases happened after January 6th. We're going to learn more about the license plate reader. We're going to learn more about his whereabouts on that day. We may have an alibi. We may have a bunch of other things that have not been disclosed yet because it's so early in the case. We also have no forensic evidence that places him there, no DNA evidence, no, hair follicles, no fingerprints. Doesn't look like we've done a materials analysis to connect what was found and discovered with the actual recovered items at his home or in his car. And so you start to add those things up, and that, I think, can create reasonable doubt as to every one of those elements. But what's so interesting about this case is that there is an alternative theory. Okay, a lot of the time in criminal law, there isn't a good alternative theory. There's nobody to really point at, right? We can, for example, take a look at the Tyler Robinson, Charlie Kirk case. A lot of people doubt it's Tyler Robinson, but there's not a real consensus on who the actual shooter was. It's kind of all, speculative there. We don't have a real strong name. It could be Lance Twiggs. It could be some unnamed agent, but it's kind of, out there in the ether, and more will be revealed, presumably in that case, by the defense. We'll have to wait and see. But in this case, we've got now a person identified, Shawnee Kirkhoff. And when it comes to her, we see that she was obviously there on January 6th. She was on the upper terrace. She was apparently using less than lethal force to shoot at people with projectiles. She was somebody who was at the Capitol Police, then kind of disappeared, went over to the CIA, very coincidental that she ends up at the CIA. We've had a whole pattern of CIA interference with President Trump, engineering and manufacturing various allegations. Originally, back in the aftermath of 2016, they were engineering the Russia collusion hoax by taking the Hillary Clinton campaign propaganda, shoving it in the back of the classified annex of the intelligence community assessment, and then using that to allege a real serious problem. They prosecuted a bunch of people. People went to jail for that. And so we've seen that they are willing to do this. We've also got a bunch of other questions about the timing and whether or not the discovery of these pipe bombs, which may or may not have been viable, just dropped at the most perfect opportune time to distract people away from the security of the Capitol building. We also, of course, have your gate analysis, which is not just an analysis based on, two healthy people without any abnormal characteristics. Shani Kirkhoff had a major injury that I think was a fracture in her leg. And so she has a very distinctive gait. You did an analysis on that. You've got experts who've done the same thing. Very high percentage is of confidence on those. And in addition, we then have other questions about her alibi. And the defense was talking about that in their subpoena, saying that one of the main elements that was articulated in her alibi was that she was at home with her boyfriend and they were recording a video about their dog. I think the dog's name was Bella. Bella is on camera kind of twitching in this video, and you just hear Shani Kirkhoff's voice. Questions about the metadata, when that was recorded, whether Shani was actually there. As you mentioned, they had a bunch of warnings that this was going to be happening. Again, that is not unusual at all. We've seen that, Joe Biden, when his offices were investigated or raided, they were warned repeatedly over and over. And I would imagine cleaned a lot of that stuff up before Karine Jean-Pierre came out and made that announcement. And if we recall, Hunter Biden also had a warehouse apparently filled with stuff, and they were going to execute a search warrant on Hunter Biden's storage unit. And Lisa Monaco from the DOJ tipped his lawyers off. So by the time they went to execute the search warrant, the warehouse was empty. So that all makes sense. Like, that all actually happens in the real world. And then they conduct a raid. And, oh, look, we did our job and we couldn't find anything. And so that's, I think, where we're at now. But the defense has somebody that they can identify and make a theory about when they present this all to the jury, which is not a common thing in criminal law, right? Normally it's like, well, we don't know exactly what happened, but we have an absence of evidence. The government didn't do their due diligence in investigating all of the various possibilities. We know our guy didn't do it, but we can't really explain who did do it. And so the jury is left to fill in the gaps. But this case is going to be very different because they're going to be pointing to her pretty aggressively. And we've got these subpoenas. Any comments on that rundown before I pull these up?
No, the rundown is good. We know. I'll just say this: we know that Brian's car was in the area that night during the time because we've seen it on video. The problem that the prosecution is going to have is that the car is moving and exiting onto 395, going back to Virginia at the time that the hooded bomber is walking around. They're going to have a problem with that. Okay, so the car is in the area, and his phone is pinging off of the cell towers at the time that the FBI says that that his phone is. The problem is the hooded pipe bomber is on foot at the same time, a mile away and outside of the cell phone tower vector that is pinging. So they've got a real problem there.
That's a big problem. Yeah, because you can't be in two places at once, as far as I know.
Yes. There's another problem, and that is getting to the, I almost said something I was asked not to reveal yet. All right. I had to pull back. I have to check myself on occasion when I'm talking about this.
We're digging here, so I understand.
Right. The family does not believe, nor do the attorneys believe, that he was doing DoorDash that night. We know that he has done DoorDash, but we don't believe that he was doing DoorDash that night. Although DoorDash was a big deal during the COVID lot. Yeah, obviously, all of the Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, all of that whole thing, they were making a killing during that period because, especially in severely locked down communities like DC, that was how people, ate when they didn't want to cook for themselves at the time. So there was a lot of that going on. And and so based on that, we also have a pretty solid working theory of why he was in the neighborhood at that time anyway, and it is food related. So I can at least say that. And then going to the case that you laid out there as far as the alternate theory, well, there's the problem starting with the alibis. They've only presented a couple of alibi theories at this point. One is the issue which was first described, and the FBI leaked this, according to CBS News, first publication to cover this, to dispute my story, said that they had 3 sources from the FBI corroborating their familiarity with a video of Miss Kirchhoff, and I quote, playing with her puppies during the time frame that the bomber was on foot inside DC. Now, Kirchhoff and her partner live in Alexandria, Virginia, just across the river. And so this is what they released. The 3 corroborating intelligence community sources to CBS said that Ms. Kirchhoff was playing with her puppies. Then what they didn't know is that, because, as I mentioned early on in our interview here today, is that despite the fact that CIA and other intelligence community people scrub their history from the internet, they do everything they can. But as there's you've heard that phrase, the internet never forgets. There's always echoes out there and whispers and, ghost images of things that you've tried to make go away. There's 2 photographs that we found from her social media that we were able to recover from the deep web. And one of those was the adoption of her dog, Bella, a retired greyhound racing dog from Florida, that she and her partner went to Florida and adopted this dog and brought it home. So we found the photographs and the discussion of them adopting this dog. Interesting date, exactly to the day 1 month before Hoodie walked around DC. This dog was adopted on December 5th, 2020. 1 month later, January 5th, 2021 was when the bombs were placed at RNC and DNC. According to the alibi, the first version of the alibi, she was home playing with her puppies, as described to CBS by 3 intelligence community sources familiar with the video.
And plurals, as in puppies.
Puppies is a very different thing than an old retired greyhound.
Right.
Okay. So what we did is we released to the public. Now, I was under a gag order from the Blaze at the time, by the way. I was completely not allowed to talk. In fact, Blaze wasn't allowing me to do any outside interviews on any subject whatsoever. I couldn't talk about assassination attempts. I could write stories, but I could not do any outside interviews at that time whatsoever. So through some proxies, I released these photographs that we found of the dog, not the puppies. We also found a review that Miss Kirchhoff had given to her dog sitter. She'd given this guy a 5-star review, and mentions the name of the dog in the review. And again, singularly a dog, not puppies, she talked about how, grateful they were that he would accommodate their tough schedule because they were both involved in law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we found this evidence of an adult dog, not puppies. So we released that in social media. Well, her law firm, Claire Locke, had to scramble, because I know people think that this is no big deal, because the second thing that happened is that her law firm releases in their demand letter against me and against the Blaze, they say that Ms. Kirchhoff, they had video of Ms. Kirchhoff at home caring for her dog. So 3 intelligence community sources say she was playing with her puppies. Then in the demand letter, prior to an actual lawsuit complaint being filed, they changed that to caring for her dog. She was home caring for her dog. That's what the video shows. That's version number 2. And they had to scramble because it couldn't be puppies anymore, because we embarrassed them by showing that She didn't have puppies. She had an adult dog.
And the
Version
more
number
that
3
litigation goes on, the more these little minor inconsistencies can stack up, and then it looks like somebody's trying to fix the narrative.
And then version number 3 happens in the actual lawsuit itself, in which they release a still image of an adult dog asleep on a couch, in which they describe that in the video, Miss Kirchhoff's voice can be heard off camera talking about how the dog twitches in its sleep.
Right. So she's not even in the video. It's just some audio in the background.
Right. And then the second and only other alibi piece of evidence that is allegedly part of her alibi is a purchase receipt from some restaurant that allegedly took place at the same time there in Virginia. Now, any of those things can be fake, duplicated. We're talking about the CIA. We're talking about the CIA. We're talking about the CIA, who can create entire dossiers, back histories for their agents with multiple passports, multiple IDs, multiple driving licenses from any country on the planet Earth. In fact, I'll tell you this. Because of this investigation, I've learned, and this is really new because of something else that we're looking at that I can't discuss in detail right now, but I have learned that liaisons from CIA who work with Congress, that work with the congressional committees that oversee the intelligence community, oversee CIA, that office inside the ranking member or the committee chair's office for these committees, that they themselves even use fake swipe cards, IDs, and names when working with Congress.
Yep.
So we're talking about pros at creating alternate histories for people. And this was one that they created that we embarrassed them on because they didn't believe that we had the history and that we were skilled enough as, amateur sleuths to find this information. We embarrassed them, so they changed it from playing with her puppies to caring for her dog to, she's off camera and talking about a dog that is asleep, twitching in its sleep. But more importantly, she also, in her FBI interview, she originally said that she had no memory or knowledge of where she was and what she was doing on January 5th. And it wasn't until a week after her failed polygraph that they produced this video that allegedly her partner then produced to the FBI. I found this video, and the timestamp is during that time on the evening of January 5th.
Yeah, and they want to learn a lot more about that. So let's go to these subpoenas. So we have, as we can see right here, Brian Cole Jr.'s defense team now submitting just days ago a renewed motion for subpoenas. And we've got several of these that are going out now. This happened a while ago. They wanted original subpoenas issued back in April, and we read through them at the time. And the court didn't rule on that request. So things kind of just stalled out for a little bit. But the three people who are now the subject of these, one, Shawnee Kirchhoff. We've got Daniel Dickert, who is the boyfriend. Don't know if they're still together, but was, I guess, living with Shawnee at the time. And then this one's interesting, too, because it's Dr. Michael Nuremberg, who I believe is her podiatrist. It's somebody who works on her.
It's an actual. He's a professional guy. He's often all over the country and through the federal system called upon as an expert witness with regards to podiatry and gait.
Got it. Okay.
So my partner Joe Hanneman has also interviewed him. We published his findings in our own research.
Interesting. Okay, so he may not be meeting with her, but they're asking for records from him.
Or having him analyze.
All right, so it says, now we asked for this months ago. Instead, the filing prompted a months-long dispute over sealing. This is where some of the new information came out, turned into an entire, explosive scandal. They were saying you violated the order of seal, and now you're revealing, confidential information that shouldn't be out publicly. So then the government moved for an order to show cause, right? The defense now getting hit by the prosecutors. And that's a whole separate thing, right? Isn't one of the prosecutors on here, Jocelyn Ballantyne, who is a well-known J6 prosecutor who was not fired by Jeanine Pirro?
She basically oversaw all of the January 6th prosecutions, and now she is the lead on this case.
Yeah, very interesting. And so the parties were briefed what should appear on the public docket. Bunch of filings here, all marked as docket entries. The court then resolved that dispute back on July 8th at a status conference, adopting Mr. Cole's proposed redactions, declining to adopt the government's additional ones. So defense wins, will redact these things and refile. The court found that what the government wanted redacted already relate to publicly available information or to general investigative techniques. And so the government wanted to overseal things. And ultimately, the court kind of split it. So new items get on the docket with some redactions. This is the defense brief. So then on July 9th, the court directed the clerk to file the redacted pleadings on the docket, where the subpoena motion now is at docket 84 and denied the other sealing motions is moot. Now, the defense says from Brian Cole, what the court has not yet done is grant the relief that we asked for originally. We wanted 3 subpoenas. We haven't gotten approval for those. So Mr. Cole has not yet issued or served any of these subpoenas. Now we renew the request now in a more narrowed form with the appropriate information redacted from each subpoena. We'll take a look at each one of those coming up. But Mr. Cole incorporates the full background as it appears in the original motion, and they give us some details, once again, on Shawnee Kirkhoff as part of the official record. They explain, Ms. Kirkhoff was a U.S. Capitol Police officer on January 6, 2021, and was present at the Capitol that day, as we discussed. She now works for the CIA. On November 6, 2025, the FBI interviewed her and administered a polygraph examination that asked her twice and directly whether she placed the pipe bombs. She failed it, period. The next day, 5 days before the FBI opened a file on Mr. Cole, the FBI named her as a person of interest and issued subpoenas and preservation requests for her electronic accounts. Over the weeks that followed, agents then questioned Ms. Kirkhoff and her boyfriend, Daniel Dickert, also a Capitol Police officer, interviewed her coworkers and neighbors, surveilled her without her knowledge, requested her employment records from the CIA, and captured footage of her walking to a podiatrist, apparently for a gait analysis, the guy you just mentioned. Mr. Cole was arrested on December 5th, 2025. Then as soon as they pick up Brian Cole, boom, FBI closes the lead on Ms. Kirkhoff a month later. So then after Brian filed his April 1 motion, the government gave us additional things, produced additional Kirkhoff materials in discovery, specifically stating that it was doing so because it believed that the materials were responsive to the subpoenas. And in other words, if we give it to you now as part of discovery, you won't need these subpoenas and we'll just call those things moot. In its production of June 30, the government supplied part, but only part, of what Brian Cole had asked one subpoena recipient, Shawnee Kirkhoff, to produce. Mr. Cole does not ask this court to order production of documents he now has, but he's narrowed his request accordingly. So some items came over, but we still need more stuff. So now we're back renewing our demands for these subpoenas. Here's what they want. A subpoena to Shawnee Kirkhoff, we've got it queued up, that has been narrowed. We withdraw the former request for items 2, 9, and 11, but the remaining requests are refined in scope. We want documents that reflect the disposition of her iPhone 7 and the identification of her Apple Watch and associated accounts. And I think, Steve, you were front and center of identifying the watch, right? Almost even saying that she was talking to the watch.
Well, we were saying that Hoodie was talking to the watch.
Hoodie, correct, yes.
Now,
Yes,
one thing we have not shown video on, because I've now that this is public, all right, I will add to this, is while Brian Cole Jr. has never worn a watch of any kind, much less a smartwatch, is that we have very, very clear, close, high definition video of Capitol Police Officer Shawnee Kirkhoff wearing this identical Apple Watch that I'm wearing right now, and also on the evening of January 6th, speaking into it and having a full conversation on her Apple Watch. That's the first time I've ever revealed that. We have that video.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So obviously, this is why the defense wants it so badly, to see what those records look like, to see if that video footage will have, a timestamp that matches some activity on her watch that is actually attributed to her. So they want iPhone, Apple Watch stuff. They want a subpoena to the boyfriend, Dickert, in the form previously submitted and narrowed in scope. And then, of course, to the doctor, presumably doing the gait analysis. They
Now,
say,
let me insert something in here. I have purposely never, in a single interview that I have done on this case, and as you know, I've done many very high profile interviews, I have purposely never mentioned Dan Dickert one time. I've talked about her partner, but I've never mentioned his name before. I've avoided that just out of respect to the case, etc. But I will add to this, now that it is public and this has come out in these court filings, his participation in this is that one of the most interesting aspects that's going on behind the scenes that I will reveal, it's may or may not be a part of the case or not, but we do know for a fact through very high-ranking and reliable sources at the Capitol Police that Mr. Dickert has not been back to work since our story came back on November 8th. He initially took a leave of absence. He got an extended period of absence, claiming some sort of health-related need for, whatever. That has run out. And from what I'm hearing is that he's filing for some sort of permanent job-related disability, which we believe is on the, let's say, psychiatric side of things, not physical, and that it ties back to the distress that I'm speculating, I'm speculating that it may tie into the stress because it ties in. His absence began the day after this story came out. He's not been back to work since.
Yeah, that's an interesting fact. And I'm certainly a big fan as a defense lawyer of the presumption of innocence. So I think that everybody's entitled to that. And, the evidence will be fleshed out. This is, of course, a part of the public record. This is a public filing. You can go to Court Listener and get it. So we're not trying to, smear anybody unfairly. This is the defense's argument, and they're naming these people. And you can put, two and two together to understand what the theory is going to be as this case advances to trial. So their arguments about why we need these subpoenas, their narrower requests, and he's otherwise withdrawn the original categories. These are very narrowly tailored. He's working in good faith to get this material. Also, the government's production that they gave to him. So they send subpoenas back in April. The prosecutors and Jocelyn Ballantyne start to hand stuff over. And he writes from the defense that the government's production confirms rather than moots the need for these subpoenas. They turn stuff over to say, okay, we've complied. You don't need anything more. They say, not at all. Actually, a subpoena is not defeated because the government has produced material on the same subject. The second Nixon element asks whether the specific documents that are sought are not otherwise procurable by due diligence. It's about the documents, not the topic. Saying the government produced what the government collected. And so if they don't have it, we need to go get it. Rule 17C reaches what the witnesses themselves hold, including the native files, the devices those files sit on, and the materials the government never requested or never received, right? So prosecution saying, we've already given you everything we have. And they say, okay, well, in this production, you're missing these very key components that you maybe should have asked for, and you didn't do that. So now we need to go to the court to get permission to do that. So the remainder of the showing is unchanged. Kirchhoff, Dickert, Nierenberg, the doctor, they remain the only sources for these records. Brian Cole still needs them in advance of trial, including the time required to review the productions, issue any follow-on subpoenas, retain a podiatry expert to interpret the gait analysis. And we've conferred with the government. The prosecutors oppose the motion, and they oppose the issuance of the 3 subpoenas. And so presumably they'll be issuing a very substantive response to all of it. So that's just a brief. And then in the subpoenas, they're very similar, but I'll just share them with everybody here. You can see this one is what they're asking for. This one would go over to Shawnee Kirkhoff right here. This is Brian Cole's defense submitting this. Has not been signed off or approved at all yet. But in it, they are going to give us the boilerplate stuff, the instructions. We're familiar with these. We request everything. Essentially, it's multiple ways of saying we want every single thing that you have: file folders, binders, file drawers, file boxes, notebooks, anything. And so your job is to go identify these things, anything in your possession, custody, control. Whenever information is about a negotiation and you say that you cannot give it to us, let us know why. We define what a communication means, everything: emails, texts, phone calls, agreements. We define what documents means: pamphlets, brochures, circulars, working papers. We define you and your, in case there's any concern about that. You is Shawnee Kirkhoff, including your agents, your officers, your employees, your representatives. Federal government means anything connected to the federal government: DOJ, FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office, computer analysts, response teams. And this one is a big one about her polygraph. And let's not forget anything with the CIA and the Capitol Police as well, all bundled up in here. But your polygraph, they want info about that, saying it means the polygraph examination administered on you on or about November 6th in connection with the pipe bomb case from J5 and 6, including all pre-test, in-test, post-test interviews, all questions asked or proposed, all instructions, advisements, consent forms, and acknowledgement forms, all examiner notes, scoring sheets, charts, reports, recordings, and results, all communications concerning the examination or its outcome, which examination was accessed by the examiner, as reflected in the FBI or DOJ as a failed examination. So that's a lot. And I think part of the reason they want it all is because they want to see if it was even, validly administered according to a high standard and thresholds. So we'll see if the judge approves that, but they also want then the alibi video. So please produce the native video file that you or anyone on your behalf showed the federal government depicting your dog Bella, together with any photo, video, or audio recording created on the same device on January 5th, 2021, which she would say shows she wasn't there at the Capitol area. Also, other documents to identify the make, model, serial number of the actual IMEI, so the kind of fingerprint number that cell phones have, your telephone number, your Apple ID, current location, what happened to the iPhone 7 with the photos and the videos that we asked for that were originally recorded. We also want documents sufficient to show how the file that was referenced in request 1 was moved from that device to the iPhone 12. Okay, so it's recorded on the 7, then they move it to the 12, including any iCloud backup or migration records that reflect that transfer, trying to seek the chain of custody for the alibi video. We also want any document, file, export, folder, disk, USB, screenshot, or any other item provided to you or by you or on your behalf to the federal government on November 6th and November 12th. Videos, photos, and recordings from each interior or exterior camera at the residence that you shared with Daniel Dickert on January 5, 2021, including the camera that was aimed at Bella's crate, the front door camera, any exterior camera, for the period between J5 at 3 p.m. through January 6 at 8 a.m., right? If she's in and out of that place, she's got a front door Ring camera. She should be all over that. Should be a no-brainer. A release of that should exonerate her completely. If the footage no longer exists, then produce documents sufficient to identify the camera systems, the retention period, the cloud account, any deletion or retention action taken after November 1, 2025. Also, the communications between you and Daniel Dickert, the boyfriend, from 12 a.m. on J5 through 4:39 p.m. that day. Also, documents sufficient to identify every mobile SIM, eSIM, telephone number, Apple ID, email account, cell account, Apple Watch used by you from December 15th, 2020, all the way to January 8th, 2021. Documents also reflecting the raw badge swipe log in any document record that reflects the discrepancy between the 5:40 p.m. scheduled end and the 3:47 p.m. swipe out on January 5, 2021, including but not limited to an early release authorization, leave slip, overtime adjustment, supervisor note, schedule change, or payroll entry. And that's interesting. So I think maybe they're saying that she left early that day, right? You were supposed to finish your shift at 5:40. You left early at 3:47.
Now I can address this because this is information that I brought. So this is work from myself and my team related to this particular paragraph. So I'm not revealing anything right now from discovery because, again, the attorneys won't give me anything that is not yet public. But this is something that I brought to them. I told them that this is specifically what they needed to look for because of the work that we've done on Capitol Police CCTV cameras, specifically related to the times of arrival and departure of both Ms. Kirchhoff and Mr. Dickert coming to and from work on both January 5th and January 6th, things that we have seen. And that because of that, what we have seen, I have worked through my sources at Capitol Police, obviously trying to acquire this very information right now, but they can't access it without, giving themselves away. There's no way, the keystrokes alone would get them fired. But the bottom line is that every single door, every time that they go to work and they pass through Capitol Police HQ security, they have to swipe their badge, right? So there's a recorded swipe of that badge. Now, that was 5.5 years ago. So this is now archived. So even a higher ranking Capitol Police official would not be able to just sit at a computer and access the key card swipes from last week to make sure, so-and-so troubled employee showed up on time or whatever. They were ditching their job or leaving early or taking too long a lunch break or something like that. So they could do that, but they're not going to be able to access the archived data without a higher clearance rating and, probably some assistance to get that. So I know that this information exists, that it's archived, and that it can be acquired, but there's a swipe when they arrive. There's a swipe when they leave. And then internally, there's what they call their TNA. So I think it's interesting, it's TNA, but it's time and assignment. So it's like the old style, time cards. You go to work, you used to top an actual physical card into your time clock for when you leave and begin your tour of duty. So there is a similar electronic. So, for instance, they could arrive at Capitol Police headquarters 3 hours before their shift begins to just go to the gym and work, hang out, play cards in the locker room, whatever. They do that. But then when it's time for them to go to work, basically within 15 minutes of their assigned duty time, then they go and they do the TNA swipe. And so that then logs, okay, I am at work and on duty now. And then they reverse that. So there's at least 4 evidences of them moving around in their official capacity as Capitol Police officers. Every time they enter a building, exit, and then, of course, obviously their TNA swipes when they begin their tour of duty and when they conclude. And then if their assignment is remote, like for instance, in Daniel Dickert's case, Dickert liked working at one of the remote kiosks. So he typically had a long-term assignment at one of the Senate building's kiosks that monitors traffic coming in and out of the restricted, driveways into the buildings. He liked to work alone and by himself, and whereas Shawnee Kirchhoff was more personable and she liked being with the crowd and interacting, he's a loner. This is the known characteristics of the two individuals. And so because he works at a kiosk, he is getting an additional swipe every time he enters that kiosk.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think their argument is that
recorded movements.
Yeah. And so they're saying she left early, 2 hours early in order to go do something. And how can you account for her time if she was supposed to leave at 5:40? She left at 3:47. Did she go, do something that she shouldn't have been doing? So they're asking for.
We do see her on camera at one of the other facilities at around I'll just say 5:30-ish on the evening of the 5th. We actually see her in a building which is across the street from DNC, but it's a building that also stores Capitol Police, like fencing, and they have offices, and I think they even have may even have locker rooms in that building as well. So we do see her actually moving in a Capitol Police vehicle with some other Capitol Police officers from headquarters to this secondary location. And I think the last time that we actually see her on camera that day is around 5:40 p.m.
Interesting. Well, we'll see if they get these documents and she can explain it. But here they also want any Apple Watch or wearable device worn, paired, or controlled by any account, including model, serial number, pairing, anything controlled by her from December 15, 2020 to J8, 2021, all health data accounts, Apple IDs, and more. Same thing, any workout, heart rate, step count, stand hour, any other data synced for the device between J5 and J6, produced in native format with metadata intact. If it doesn't still exist, or if it's not still in your possession, or if it's been unpaired or anything, we'd like documents to identify what happened to it. Similarly, in point 9, the communications between you and the federal government, between you and Daniel Dickert from November 1, 25 through present, all about your polygraph, right? What were you guys saying to each other? All related to the J56 pipe bomb investigation, the photos and videos referenced in number 1, or any asserted alibi video, which is the Bella dog video. Also, finally, identify the phone number for any device you used on J5 or 6, 21, provided to you by your employer, and identify the phone network of service. And so that's a lot. I mean, they're really going to go through that with a fine-tooth comb, provided the judge ultimately approves this. But you can see why the government didn't want the subpoenas to go out, and presumably are going to be filing a very aggressive response to this, saying, we object. We then have the other subpoena. So this one is going out to the boyfriend, Daniel Dickert, and we'll fast forward through a lot of the boilerplate language. They're asking for a more limited series of items. A lot of it will mirror what they've already asked from Shawnee. But again, photograph audio about the dog containing Shawnee Kirchhoff's voice, including but not limited to any video shown or described to the federal government. That's the alibi video. Same thing about telephone numbers. What device was this created on, including the iPhone 7, where the video was originally recorded, and any iPhone 12 that the video was transferred to. Same thing, any recordings at your residence, including the cameras directed at the front door or Bella's crate, any comms from you between Shawnee from 12 p.m. J5 to 4:39 on J5. Any comms between you and the federal government about the pipe bomb investigation, the video, the polygraph, or any interview between you or Shawnee Kirchhoff. And again, identify all of the phone numbers that you have used. And that is that one, very short. And then the last one is to the doctor, Michael Nuremberg, we see here. From him, this is what they're requesting. Instructions are going to be largely the same across the board with different definitions, but here's what they want. He runs a company called Friendly Foot Care, and we want all comms about any review, analysis, comparison, assessment, or opinion by your company about Shawnee Kirchhoff, her gait, her movement, her posture, her stride, her foot mechanics, body mechanics, invoices, payment records, working notes, measurements, worksheets, any draft or preliminary analysis, surveillance materials that you received, and in the form you received them, any email exchange between you and the government, all in native formats. And again, any other communications about any gait analysis, gait comparison, biomechanical assessment, movement analysis, similar evaluation performed, prepared, transmitted by you about the J6, J5 pipe bomb investigation, including but not limited to Brian Cole Jr. So did he analyze Shawnee Kirchhoff? Did he analyze Brian Cole? What does he think about both individuals' gait? All now being demanded to be turned over to the defense based on a request for subpoenas. So we'll see what happens there. But anything stand out in those requests? I know these are relatively new.
Yeah, a lot of things stand out that I have intimate familiarity with that I've been asked not to share. I'll give you the highlights. Now, as I mentioned before, there is a tremendous amount of information because I would say from the information flow and with the amount of discovery that there is, 700,000 pages initially described by the government were going to be turned over in discovery on the Brian. 700,000 pages. They still don't even haven't even scratched the surface of that yet. The defense, and that's even though the defense has already been demanding a court. The defense is chomping at the bit. They want this. They want this trial, and that's how confident they are in what they've already seen. And while my knowledge base initially far exceeded theirs, as I mentioned earlier, their knowledge base is now overtaking mine, or certainly being supplemented with things that they can't share with me. But one of the things that I have given them is additional information through our sources about certain phone records that I was able to capture from both congressional committee sources and Capitol Police sources related to phone records. But not only that, but also from the FBI interviews of key and principal players in this case. And I was able to take this information to the attorneys relating to this mystery of the phone records. Because as we have said before, right after January 6th, and for 4.5+ years, almost 5 years, that those phone records were gone and they were corrupted. Despite the fact that the actual telecarriers were saying, no, we turned over, uncorrupted data to you. The FBI is lying to us about that. Then suddenly we name our case, and then suddenly, oh, yes, they're right. That's not corrupted.
Right.
Well, guess what? We know a lot more about those phone records and this is information, as I said, I've turned over to them, and it is killing me inside that they can't, because I cannot tell you since this has started how many times I've taken them a piece of information. They look at each other at the conference table or in the room where they're interviewing me, debriefing me. They'll look at each other and go, we can't say. And it's killing me. And I always tell them, you're killing me, man. And so the bottom line is that I know beyond any shadow of a doubt that they would not be demanding a court date as soon as possible, even without having this information yet, that they were not really confident that what I have not seen is exculpatory in Brian Cole's case and inculpatory in the other case.
Yeah, I think this is going to have to go to a trial. I cannot imagine that the prosecutors will offer him a plea deal that would be worth taking. I mean, they can't give him like a probation deal or something that would be worth taking in order to just get out of custody and close this thing down. He's the pipe bomber. He's the J6 pipe bomber, according to them. So why would they do that? Which means the only other alternative would be to offer him a bad plea deal, in which case, why would he take that? He would rather go to like you mentioned, a DC jury, which is going to be a very diverse jury based on the demographics of the district. And I think that with their case here, chipping away at all of the main elements of the prosecution's evidence, and then having a very clear alternative with a good theory behind it, is going to make the government's case hard.
Well, I have heard twice the judge, I've heard this with my own ears, I've heard the judge ask the parties in court, has there been any discussion of a plea deal? Both parties, nope.
Yep.
No discussion whatsoever. So nobody's asking for one and nobody's offering one.
Right.
Now, having said that, even that is outside of the standard operating procedure of the DOJ. As you know, 95, 98% of all federal cases are pled out before trial.
Yeah.
And yet there's no even offer in this case. It's not because the prosecution is so convinced of the, open and shut, conviction that they're going to get. It's because they know there's no sense in bringing this to the defense. The defense is not caving on this.
Right.
And, so this was the Hail Mary that they threw a couple of months ago, that the government threw in the courtroom when they put up the superseding indictment and brought in the two new charges of, a terrorism charge and a weapons of mass destruction charge. Both would carry potential life sentences for one young Brian Cole. And the point of that was to scare the defendant and his family into taking some sort of plea deal. And you know what the response was in the courtroom that day after Brian Cole pled not guilty in his own voice before the judge to those two new superseding indictments. The defense demanded a trial date, and the courtroom gasped. Prosecutors, judge, they're like, what? We just tried to scare you into a plea deal. They're not going to win this case in front of a DC jury. And I think they have to figure out a way to politically get out of this. And I know that the civil rights attorneys that are working in parallel to the criminal defense attorneys on the Cole case have, they went through the whole process of seeking, a pardon through the January 6th process, saying that the January 6th pardons applied to this case. But obviously, Brian Cole, even if they did allow for that to be considered and even to happen, it wouldn't be a pardon. It would be a case dismissal, because it can't be a pardon if he hasn't been convicted and sentenced yet, which he hasn't. So it would have to be a case dismissal. And I think that it behooves this administration, and when I say this administration, I mean the Trump administration and their DOJ and their FBI, to figure out a political exit from this. I recommend and of course I know they're listening to, because there are officials from CIA, FBI, and Claire Locke listen to this interview, because they monitor, track, record, and put in court filings everything that I say. So it's all there. So we know they're listening. My recommendation to you is that you get the administration to walk up in front of the microphones and the cameras and say that it was elements of the deep state that lied to us about this case, and we are dropping. And I don't care if you pursue the Shawnee Kirkhoff case or not criminally. I don't care. Drop the case on Brian Cole Jr. Find a political exit strategy so that you don't walk away, completely embarrassed by this. You're not going to be able to avoid it in total, but that's what you have to do.
Yeah, an acquittal would be a very big political problem, I think, for them, because now if he's not the pipe bomber, the jury didn't believe it. Now they've got another open-ended case, and I think it's just going to accelerate the focus and the attention on the alternative theory, rather than controlling the thing and kind of neutering it with a dismissal.
The alternative theory hasn't even begun to be cracked open yet. I mean, there's things that we haven't discussed here that I've discussed and that we've written about over the last several months. But there's so much more that even like I said, me and my team have looked at, have discovered, that we brought to now our attorneys and shared with them, that's going to be coming out. And then in our motion to dismiss, which is on the table right now. In fact, we have a hearing on September 2nd where we'll be arguing in court for dismissal of this case on First Amendment grounds. And I think that they have a very weak case themselves. And I will go so far as to just say this, knowing what I know on my own work that I've shared with the attorneys, not knowing a fraction of what they have learned on their own, other than what they have all disclosed in a couple of public filings, is all I know. But what I do know is that if that case is not dismissed, round 2 of the filings is going to embarrass the hell out of them. It's going to be ugly.
It's going to open the door to a whole another angle, all civil, with a whole separate, different set of rules that will presumably, advance into discovery, and then you've got interrogatories and depositions and a lot of additional developments that can happen there that can then, transfer over to the criminal case. So it seems like the thing, from their perspective, this whole thing could start to fly out of control pretty quickly here. But so that's great news. So you got a motion to dismiss in, you've got, looks like oral arguments on that coming up. And I did look through the motion to dismiss. It's all, on the public docket. And from our perspective, the fact that they even sued you and your company, and the fact that you've been kind of hit so hard with other, your prior employer and these other organizations feels a little bit strange because you're doing journalisming and you're actually following the demands of the government to help them identify who you think it is. And you've done that, I think, with a lot of due diligence, no malice at all. You've done expert witness type of review. You've gone through a gate analysis. I mean, you've really connected a lot of dots here that you would imagine more journalists would be doing, not being sued for doing the very job that you're here to do.
Well, this is what makes their lawsuit very weak, is that the diligence that we did do. Now, of course, obviously in their complaint, they assert exactly the opposite. They say that we were reckless. They literally say in the complaint that Joe Hannum and I pulled this out of our ass. We made it up. We made it out of whole cloth. That's what they say. But the actual documented, verifiable paperwork track record is that the order and the timelines and how we handled this before publication was unprecedented. What we did, we didn't immediately run to, I didn't immediately run to my editors and say, here's the draft, you got to publish this right now. Long before the draft was ever even begun, we took it to the authorities as a potential public corruption issue. This is something you might want to look at.
Right.
Now, I didn't take it to the FBI because I knew not to. I already knew they were covering up aspects of this case. And so I didn't. I've also been through an issue with this FBI, not Ray's, but with this FBI on another public corruption case that I tried to alert them about in advance, related to Congressman Corey Mills, that they suppressed. So I already knew that they were not open to me bringing them evidence of public corruption.
Yeah, and so you did. I mean, you actually went through multiple validation steps before it was even published. And what you did publish was not just, kind of a random off-the-cuff blog post. It was a very deeply researched analytical piece that you followed up on. And it was so analytical and so sufficient that the FBI looked into this person and actually brought them in for a polygraph and sat them down. And that person failed the polygraph, which helps to validate your thesis here. So
I've never said this before, but since Ed Martin is pulling out of government now and going into he's leaving his position federal and he's doing something different. Not only did we go through channels inside the government, in the intelligence community, to have this looked at because we were dealing with a member of the intelligence community that we were investigating. And so I went through that process. And they did everything correctly. They did everything legally. They formulated the draft memo as an alert. They handled everything according to their mandate, and then that got leaked. Now, they didn't leak it. Odie and I did not leak it to the press. FBI or CIA leaked it to the press. That's on them.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening is that in the final waning hours on Friday afternoon, November the 7th, I actually met with Ed Martin at his private office. We did not meet at the DOJ, but I met with Ed Martin at his office for roughly an hour. I showed him the entire case. He looked at it all, and this is what he did. He had another meeting to go to. He stood up. He was it's winter. He's putting on his overcoat, and he looks at me and he says, "You're going to get no help from the DOJ on this. None." He said, "Don't expect it. Don't imagine it. Don't fantasize about it. They are not your friends on this case." And with that, he went to his next meeting.
Yeah, I believe it. It's too much to unpack. It's much easier to just have a nice little present wrapped with a bow on it. This guy did it. Case closed. Let's move on to the next thing. Everybody can declare victory. And then there's no egg on the face of the government, who was behind a lot of, really bad things in 2020 and 2021. All right. So a couple questions. Can you take a couple questions from the audience?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a couple that came in. First of all, a comment came in from I'm P Picking Cute, says, thank God for people like Steve, who has more courage than some of our elected officials. True. When we start charging these corrupt people assorted with others who've been doing this for over a decade, we will then finally have justice. So a little comment there. Sharpie guy was asking that, or remembering that, don't forget that the hoodie waved to the police car as it passed by, right? It was either a stretch or a wave. We all remember that video.
Let me address that, because it's a significant moment in the Hoodie's journey around the RNC and DNC. Is as Hoodie was walking in front of the famous green awning of the Capitol Hill Club, and the Capitol Hill Club is a private club hangout for Republicans, and it's right next door to the RNC. Dinner club is what it is. I've actually had the opportunity to eat there 3 or 4 times, and the as the hooded bomber is walking towards the awning and just passing right in front of the entrance of the Capitol Hill Club, a marked Capitol Police car rounds the corner right in front of Hoodie, and Hoodie stretches the arm out all the way out like this. Now, typically when you're waving at somebody, it's like this. If they're in a crowd and they're far away, you might do this to get their attention. But I am not so much convinced that it was a wave, but nobody worried about drawing attention to themselves is going to do that
right
in front of a cop car while you have a bomb in your bag.
Right.
This person, throughout the walk, the 45 minutes roughly that they're on foot around the RNC and the DNC, is confident, is never scared, is very clear about what they're doing, where they're going, what the job is, what the mission is. Turns around a couple times, like you mentioned earlier, makes a couple phone calls, talks into the watch a few times, checks the text messages the first time that Hoodie sits down at the DNC bench. First time Hoodie sits at the bench, does not place the bomb. It's almost like an audible has been called, because Hoodie then goes and attempts to plant the bomb at the the Congressional Black Caucus Institute. Then a couple of minutes later, actually goes back to the DNC and plants it there, where Hoodie had previously visited. All of this is documented on film or video. And so the interesting thing about that wave or whatever is there were other eyeballs in that area that we're looking at. There's a kiosk there as well. There's a Capitol Police kiosk right there, manned by 3 officers. And there's other things that are happening curiously around that building at the time, Capitol Police related, that we've been tracking for months on Capitol CCTV. And it may have been less of a wave and more of a signal, but even if it's completely innocent, a person carrying a bomb does not attract attention to themselves in that manner.
Right. This person felt very loose, felt like they were just kind of like not even concerned with the consequences, like it was officially sanctioned or something. And even, was kind of almost even had a little pep in the step as they're turning the corner with their little hip swing. We had another question from Marlene. She says, Mr. Baker, why would the perp wear highly identifiable sneakers while on this op? What is your theory of the shoes?
Oh, well, it's interesting that the shoes that were worn were a special edition, limited edition Nike shoe. I think they were $350, $400 pair of shoes. The Brian Cole's family said, no, Brian would never spend money on shoes. They said we have to buy shoes for him because he destroys his shoes. And she said, I started buying Crocs for him because he likes to walk on the outside of the heel of the shoe when he walks the streets many times a day. He walks miles a day and he destroys his shoes. So the mother started buying him Crocs. She said, there's no way Brian would spend $400 on a pair of shoes. These are athletic shoes. The bomber's very athletic gait with a little hitch in the step from an injury. Very identifiable, diagnosable movement of a person who has had a massive trauma to a right tibia broken in half. And this is what brought my eyes to looking closer at my person of interest, number one. And I'm dancing around. I'm dancing. When I do this, I'm dancing in my head about what I can say, what I can't say. What I know is about the shoes. Yeah, I can say this. We've published this before. This particular 2018 Nike Air Max Speed Turf shoe came in multiple team colors. There's the New York Giants edition. There's the Miami Dolphins edition, blah, 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 blah. Well, this particular shoe is white, black, and gold. Coincidentally, the exact same colors of the professional soccer team that Ms. Kirchhoff played for in Columbus, Ohio.
Amazing coincidence. Isn't that fun?
Tons of similar coincidences in this case.
There are a lot of them. All right, that was great. Okay, so we got a couple more. One from Super Buff Shaft says, Rob, great work by you and Mr. Baker. Please ask him why, and you may not know this, why Glenn and the Blaze never covered the mass crimes exposed by the 21 Arizona state audit. Easy to see the J6 was the cover-up to the election coup. Was to cover the election coup.
Well, I can't say that the Blaze never covered the Arizona State audit. I would be surprised if they didn't. But understand that my position at the Blaze only began 3 years ago. I was not around during the 2020 election at the Blaze, and then to say that they didn't cover it would be dismissing the work of dozens of other writers that work for the Blaze. Not only that, but all of their television shows as well. And I certainly cannot speak to all of the show hosts and what topics that they chose to cover from day to day. But by and large, between the programming at Blaze TV and the writers at theblaze.com, I can't imagine that this was a story that was ignored, and certainly not purposely. It would not be something that anybody would have an editorial dictum to avoid, because they covered election fraud and election corruption issues at large.
Yeah, there was a lot going on then, and that's a big organization. But yeah, I'm curious what specifically maybe was missed, according to Super Buff Shaft. What maybe just not a super high priority on that one particular matter. But Arizona Arizona got a lot of overlook, I would say. It was kind of pushed aside.
I can't speak to that. I mean, the only thing that because look, I had a very, very narrowly focused project. They brought me to the Blaze specifically because of my January 6th work. And while that took up, I would say at the time, 50% of what I was working on, then I would get assignments. And typically my assignments were almost always associated with the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, the areas that I'm more or less expert in, and that I have the deepest resources and sources. And so, for instance, when the Butler assassination attempt happened, I got a call from my editor-in-chief, within 30 minutes, and he said, "Okay, drop everything you're working on. You're on this." And so I'd get assigned to that. And then fast forward to April of last year, 95, I was working on a directed energy weapons investigation, and I get a call from the editor-in-chief, and he said, "Okay, drop everything you're working on. I'm putting you on Corey Mills, the Florida congressman who just lost his primary election."
Right.
And so I spent the next 2 or 3 months exclusively traveling and working on that assignment. So at that, once I get a highly siloed focused assignment like that, that's kind of my process. I become unaware of anything else that's happening in the country. I don't even know. That's just the way my brain works, and I become obsessed with that topic that I'm assigned, and so I couldn't tell you even at that moment what else the Blaze was covering or not covering.
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Super Buff, on that one. And we'll just take a couple more, and then we'll let you go. Steve, thank you for spending so much time with us today. Doan is asking, Steve, is it too late? Is it too soon to ask about civil litigation for a large financial settlement from the Biden administration? Well deserved for you. I think maybe more of a comment, but
obviously, as you know, there's been the thought that through the weaponization process that there would be some big, $1.5 billion payout to people that were subject to the weaponization of the Biden administration, and now that has gone away. And look, I don't think that that's ever going to happen. I'm not opposed to it, because regardless of how the money would be doled out, I might get some of it. I don't want to get I don't want to get taxpayer money, though. I mean, I don't want somebody who had no part in this whatsoever having money stolen out of, this is my libertarianism. I don't want money stolen out of anybody's pocket and handed to me from a taxpayer. Now, on the other hand, the government does, in fact, regularly compensate people when they have been unjustly treated, and sometimes it can be in very, very high millions of dollars, and so that does happen. But I would think that if this president, if it was a big enough concern to him with his associations and with the billionaires that he can get to rally against the candidates that he disfavors and put their billions into campaign financing funds and super PACs and that sort of thing, if this was a big enough issue for him, he could raise $1.5 billion privately and establish this fund on his own without taxpayer money and not having to go through any type of congressional approval whatsoever. Private foundation could pick this up and take care of this, and he has the ability to do that if it was that big of a concern to him. So that's my comment on that.
Yeah, good answer. And I think John just had a good idea. You could also seize it from the places like the Southern Poverty Law Center, who got $500 million in cash, and then we're manufacturing a lot of the extremism that led to a lot of the victimization of the J6ers. Spuds asked a question: why would someone who habitually wipes their phone want to wear an Apple Watch? Kind of pointing out perhaps a contradiction there between the two.
Wouldn't. And that's the characteristic of this type of person. He doesn't wear jewelry at all, none. Now, I've spent an hour in Brian Cole's bedroom. I've pilfered through his stuff. They've left his bedroom in the exact condition that the FBI left it in after they rifled through everything and disheveled and basically ransacked his room. The only thing that the family has done to his room since the FBI left is they put the mattresses and the box spring back on his bed frame. The FBI didn't even do that. They didn't even return that's how, anyway, that's how they are. And so otherwise, I've been through the room exactly as they left it. I've rifled through all of the paperwork on his desk. I've looked at everything. I've been in the closet. I've looked at all of his shoes. I've held every pair of shoes in his hands. Every pair of shoes he owns is a size 12, not a size 9 or a 9.5. And despite that intimacy and the knowledge that I have, of all of that's going on, one thing that is absolutely certain is he has no jewelry. He has no watches, never worn a watch, never owned a watch, never wore a ball cap, never owned a ball cap. And he's never owned a $400 pair of Nike Air Max Speed Turf shoes in the color of the Columbus Eagles semi-pro women's soccer team.
Sounds very believable to me. And they were not able to recover those things. They'll just say he tossed them. That's why he never had them. But a lot of these things just don't add up. And then one final one from Burton, B.A. Burton says, are they really this unconscious about easily identifiable items like shoes and so many other blatantly identifiable actions, et cetera? It's almost like they were on purpose. So maybe talking about maybe doing laps, knowing they'd be on camera, maybe waving or stretching or whatever that was, maybe the shoes. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, they do in fact do things on purpose, and in fact, what the FBI told the congressional committee about the pipe bomber's shoe size. Have you ever seen that in the congressional report that the FBI informed them that the shoe size was between a 9 and a 13?
Okay.
So the FBI covered their ass.
Yeah.
Of course, they lie about this stuff. We're talking about an agency with an $11 billion annual budget and better criminal forensic technology than anybody else on the planet Earth. And you're telling me that they left 4 sizes different for the pipe bomber, and I was able to narrow it down to 9 and a 9.5 with a ruler?
Right. Just walk outside like you did. Just go put it on the ground and go measure it. It's not that complicated. And your assessment was spot on. You have it all on video, and you have a very narrow range. And under their range and analysis, it could be anybody. It could be a female with a small foot. It could be a man with a big foot. Of course, making it all that much more difficult to actually pin it down.
Exactly. They're not that. Look, the first thing that you always do when you're talking about a government agency or a bureau or a department of any kind, and you're looking for a problem, possible corruption, possible even conspiracy, is the first thing that you always have to do is you have to default to incompetence, first of all. You have to go there first. And I always, as a general rule, default to incompetence. And I'm going to tell you right now, they're not that smart. They're just not. And so there's a tremendous amount of incompetence in this case. But then once the incompetence has revealed itself, then the cover-up has begun. Because one of those issues, not only do we have the issue of the missing and corrupted, phone data, but just go back to the DNC cameras alone. The DNC cameras alone are a big problem because, as has been pointed out by many more people other than just myself, but other investigators that have spent a lot of time on this, you've got to be freaking kidding me if the FBI wants us to believe that the DNC cameras that recorded the placement of the bomb at the DNC are only 1.2 frames per second.
Ridiculous.
You can't buy those cameras any longer in a pawn shop that's had them for 40 years.
Right.
You can't get it. We're talking about the actual facility where the Watergate break-in took place. We're talking about the DNC, not the facility, but the DNC. They're not going to have lax security, and they have 24-hour security on the other side of the building, by the way. But manned, law enforcement. And so the one thing that did not happen is that the DNC did not have 1.2 frames per second cameras. The second thing that did not happen is that the FBI did not only get the footage from 7 o'clock to midnight, because other stuff happened during the night there, and other stuff happened right up until 1:05 p.m. just off camera, because the Secret Service vehicles are parked in the driveway in front of the parking garage because Vice President-elect Kamala Harris is inside that building, and Capitol Police plainclothes officer, counter surveillance officer, walks over to the Secret Service vehicles, notifies them that there's a bomb 10 feet from you right here. And they spent 2.5 minutes sitting in the cab of those cars finishing their sandwiches, their lunch, that had just been delivered to them by another cop car. That's all on video as well. So rather than, diving out of the cab of those vehicles and immediately cordon-offing the area and following the protocols and the standard operating procedures of their training, they finished their sandwiches. Whereas the bomb discovery was just a slight camera angle away, off of camera. And for some reason, the two cameras that recorded the pipe bomb being dropped, that footage is not available for when the pipe bomb is discovered. Bullshit.
Perfect. Yep. Interesting how that always seems to happen.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, Steve. So I want to share a meme with you that one of our amazing community meme smiths, as we call her, made. and then while we're looking at this baby, that's you, Captain Truth Seeker, in the house. And why don't you tell people about your new operation, Veritas Regnat? Is that how I say it? And what you're up to and where people can find you?
Okay, so immediately after leaving the Blaze, Joe Hanneman and myself, we put together a new company, and it's an actual company that was formed just so we would have an alternate place to publish what we were doing. It was meant as a placeholder. And interestingly, the Kirchhoff and her attorneys have found it in their infinite wisdom to sue a company that didn't even exist.
I noticed
when
that.
the story came out. So this company was launched immediately after our leaving the Blaze. I left the Blaze on April 1st. He left 2 days later, and we launched the company. It was meant as a placeholder until something else that we were working on had developed. Well, that other thing is now coming to fruition. I can't talk about it publicly yet, but so we're going to be shuttering the new company because we don't need it anymore. But we needed a place to legally receive funds and pay taxes and withholding, and we did. That's how we handled it. And so that is going to be shuttered shortly. We're just kind of leaving it static right now and phasing that out. And then we'll be announcing the other thing here very shortly. But that's what that is. So I would not, in terms of tracking me, if you're looking, if your followers, readers, listeners are looking for a place to just follow me on X for the time being. I do everything to X first, and then I go to the other social media platforms from there. So everything that I do is going to come first on X or be linked out of X. So Steve Baker USA, that's my handle there, and that's also my handle on a couple of other social media platforms as well.
Amazing. And I would encourage people to absolutely follow you, but then also to subscribe to you. I just subscribed over there on X so that I can get kind of the behind the scenes thoughts of Steve Baker and what's cooking next. So, and it's also a great way to support you. I think it's important to do that. We've got fewer and fewer actual journalists who will look into hard cases and get calls from maybe the FBI director to say, stop doing what you're doing. You're one of those guys with the courage to do it. And so we really appreciate all the time here today. Obviously, I think there's going to be a lot more to come on this thing. We got, a trial. You've got your defamation case. And I think a lot more evidence will be revealed. And so we appreciate you sitting down with us and explaining everything. I know a lot of people in the chat were.
And I want to thank your meme maker. I want to thank your meme maker there because I didn't get a chance to comment on it, but I loved it. And thanks for, you gave me a little bit more of a square jaw. I like that. I have muscles, and that's important. Maybe I'll reach out. Maybe I can get the contact information, and I'll reach out when we're firing up. See, I'm a musician as well. And so I'm actually re-engaging with one of my bands again. So I'll be talking about that in the background on my, subscribers only on X as well. And so maybe I'll have them, your meme maker, do make us some images for the new band.
She'd love to do that. Her name's Heidi. She's at HeidiProductions.com. Little plug for her there. And she's awesome. She does, she's really been a fun part of our community and an amazing person. So I'll send it over to you as well. But my friends, of course, make sure you're following Steve out there because this case is going to continue on and we'll keep our eye on it. And then Steve, hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Robert, I loved it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you and your work that you're doing.
Likewise. Yeah, we're very grateful for what you're doing and we'll see you out there. All right, everybody, that was Steve Baker. And as one final encouragement, go give him a follow on X. His account is at Steve Baker USA because he loves America and the truth. And so we've got a lot more to unpack together, of course, with the pending litigation in both matters. We're going to keep our eye on that. We appreciate you joining us for this extended edition. I thought we learned a lot of good things here, got some behind the scenes insight. We, of course, read the documents here, go through a lot of the case filings and what's happening in litigation, but to see and to spend time with the man who was responsible for initiating a lot of it was a real treat. So once again, Steve Baker, USA on X. And thank you for joining us on this lovely Saturday. We've got a couple other comments that I wanted to hit, and then we'll wrap on the day, my friends. Who else was joining us? We had some other interesting comments. Richard Tatership just squeezed this one in as we were wrapping. Says the smartwatch can be tracked from a timestamp CCTV. Well, I would say that you could easily corroborate the two. Okay, so like the smartwatch will have its own log. If it's got like a connection to a cell phone, might even be having other, more details like GPS location data that's associated with it. But you could then also just compare and contrast that, cross-reference that with the other CCTV footage, which I'm sure they're doing as we speak. So thank you for that, Richard Tatership. Super Buff Shaft, what's up? This is a Fulton County question. Says, actually not. Between the size of 9 and 13, I think in a comment, same like the court docs from Fulton, 600 plus boxes taken. They can't give an exact number and let us know if some were stolen from when the FBI agent warned of the raid. I see. So yeah, kind of an amorphous labeling and definitional style of conversation from the FBI and the federal government. You don't want to get too specific because then the information might be useful and then people can piece things together themselves, and nobody wants to do that. So thank you, Super Buff. Thank you for watching over on Rumble. Shout out to our friends on Rumble who also joined us over there. And we had some new members come in. So what's going on? More here. What's up? Steve is here. We got more here, brought in 10 more members right here. Thank you, more here, for doing that. Big welcomes to Steve. We got RLT. We got Beverly Heller. What's up? Crayon Eater in the house. Amy Casca, Michelina, Gay Aries Guy. What's up? Danny Pitzer. What's up? Glenn and Sparta American in the house. Gifted memberships courtesy of More Here. And good to see you. We got Kellen Pitts also became a supporter. Great to see everybody. We'll be back with another members only morning stream on Monday. But since we had a special guest appearance today, we wanted to make sure that we could go live so that we could get his message out as far and wide as quickly as possible. And hopefully you enjoyed that. But Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern time, we'll come back with our next members only stream. Can't wait to see everybody there. What's up? Elizabeth Sizemore. Also, welcome aboard. Kathy, we got some new members here, man. Welcome, Kathy. Awesome to see you. Jeffrey Adams asked this question. Why don't you subpoena John Ratcliffe and put him under oath? You mean like as opposed to Shawnee Kirkhoff? Why don't you also? He might be listening. We just saw that Steve Baker said he might even be here. What's up, John Ratcliffe, if you're out there? Yeah, I don't know. Well, I know why you can't subpoena the CIA director. They'll say he's not a relevant or necessary witness, and what does he know? And these general kind of fishing expeditions are usually not enabled by the courts unless you're like Donald Trump. Then they'll do whatever. But yeah, it's interesting. We don't know what he knows about this, but Shawnee, seemingly has a lot of information that the defense wants. We'll see if the judge gets it to them, but time will tell. We'll keep our eye on that one. Wookie Sir says, why won't Rob G cover the coup video from Millie? And I don't know. I just must be a pathetic person or something. I don't even know what you're talking about. So the coup video from Millie, why don't you send it to me and I'll take a look at it? It's normally, if we don't cover something, it's usually because I don't think it's interesting or relevant or timely or it's duplicative. There are many reasons why we don't cover things, or I never saw it is probably the biggest reason that I think is applicable on this one. But I don't know. I don't even know what you're talking about. So if you want to send it to me in an email, then I can answer that better than I can right now. So thank you, Wookie Sir, for the donation. Not sure why we haven't covered it, because we're losers probably. But hey, I'm P Picking Cute. Second half of your question, I got the second half to Steve. First question, a part of it said, I hate dirty cops more than I hate drug dealers. Well, yeah. I mean, drug dealers are, not promising you a standard of care. They're not taking an oath to say that they're going to serve the law. Okay, dirty cops do, and then they undermine that. What's going on? Corruption and abuses of power make me livid, but what I absolutely abhor is injustice. Me too, I'm Pete Picking Cute. I hate it. Charging, attempting to imprison, actually imprisoning innocent people is the worst. It's actually like one of the underpinnings of our justice system. There's a phrase that comes up a lot. It's, I'd rather 10 guilty people go free than one innocent person go to jail. Because the system is oriented towards protecting the innocent rather than it is about other elements, right? So criminal justice, like there's whole classes on this, but what is it for? A lot of it is to be punitive. Society oftentimes have certain like morality standards. We have very harsh punishments for people who are PDF files in a lot of places. There's a whole contingent of America who doesn't think that should be even criminalized anymore. It's like, well, it's not that big of a deal. But largely, right, society sets morals, has some moral features, sets some standards, and then has a baseline there. And you shouldn't be dropping underneath that. Otherwise, you get punished for violating those societal standards. You also have a concept in criminal justice, which is about rehabilitation. You want to rehabilitate people who are not acting in the interest of society. You give them a penalty, you give them some punishment, you give them some rehab, they come back. Now they're good, upstanding citizens and they can be productive and actually contribute, whereas before they were engaging in criminality. You also have a disincentive type of modality. So somebody does bad things, they get punished, and that disincentivizes other people from doing bad things. So there's a compliance component. But largely, the whole thing is, the underpinning, the presumption of innocence, due process of law, the right to counsel, the right against self-incrimination. All these things are to protect the innocent. And when a society flips and it's more about accomplishing those other things, like perhaps we want to disincentivize anybody from doing this, doesn't matter if they're innocent or guilty, as long as it serves the disincentive function, right? That means that your society is more about establishing a certain behavioral norm rather than it is prosecuting the guilty. So we can never forget that. That's why the presumption of innocence, even if it seems like there's overwhelming evidence against one particular defendant or the person of interest one, we still want to adhere to the presumption of innocence for everybody. Okay, that's the beauty of our system, is like iron sharpens irons. Both sides make their case. And then ultimately, the jury gets to decide which is more persuasive. But even that process can be perverted, like what happened to Derek Chauvin. Bruce Rice, baby. What's up, Bruce Rice? Hey, shared this one of your boy. Man, you guys make me look so good. Look at this one. Definitely have the conspiracy hat on, that's for sure. And it's electric. Boogie, woogie, woogie. We also have some muscles that I got to work on. Thank you for that, Bruce Rice. Doan says, remember to keep prayers up for Gina Hansen as her shoulder's being swapped out today. Wow, I didn't realize that. Gina, prayers up your way. Hopefully surgery is just happening immaculately right now. You've got the healing care and guidance of our Heavenly Father looking down, energizing the very fingers with nimble skill sets to connect everything exactly where it needs to go. And you're going to be out here and you're going to be with that new shoulder. You're going to be throwing 65 yards first throw. It's going to be incredible. We also, hey, we had some thumbs up. What's up? T-Rock, Gina Hansen sent a floating heart. Ken Kraus, what's up? We got chili coming from Gina. High fives coming from Ken. Thank you, friends, for sending those in. Rustic Ranch. What's up, Rustic Ranch? Hey, that's Bill Tong, isn't it? Said they just rated the stream. Shout out to our friends over on Rumble, Rustic Ranch. We got John Carew, always doing excellent work, Robert. Thank you, John. We didn't have to do anything today. Steve Baker handled the whole show. He's a pro. We just said, drop that brilliance for all of us here. Your boy just had to take a back seat today. So all credit to him. T-Rock says, let him cook, and sent an emoji to that effect as well. This is what this one looks like. Looks like some eggs and bacon, man. Shout out. We love eggs and bacon. Outstanding. And of course, friends, that's what we've got on the day. Just Rhonda sending this one in. Rob, we've had your back all morning. Well, thank you for that, Just Rhonda. We appreciate that. I need some support, elsewise I'm in big trouble if left to my own devices. So thank you, Just Rhonda, for doing that. Yeah, and we're going to do some clips of Steve, and we'll share those around because I think there was some really good knowledge in there. What's going on And we got Rob. What's up, Rob, in the house? The DC IndyCar race starts today. I saw that. MAGA 250. I think today's just practice, right? And then the actual race is tomorrow. And thank you for that. And what's going on? B Money. Hey, love you, Rob. Don't take my pushback on Baker as a slight to you, but I'm not going to let Trump doomers spread psyop lies. So you think the whole thing's, so like the evidence that you heard today, or the various, like the defense talking about Shawnee, her alibi, her leaving early for work that day, those things like that doesn't register in terms of sufficient evidence. I personally don't think that an FBI that is wrong on certain things, or a DOJ that is wrong on certain things, is a slight to the president. Personally, I think that the presidency is much bigger than any one case or any one agency or any one entity. And Trump can't possibly know everything everywhere all the time. So I think that it's part of our duty to help ensure that the agencies are held accountable and that they're doing their jobs. And this is I think part of the American system. The people, it's we the people, and we check our federal government, even if our guy's in there, because Trump can't possibly know anything, right? And everything about everything is really what I meant to say. So I don't see it as like a slight on Trump. I think that some people might say that if you impugn Kash Patel, or if you impugn Dan Bongino, then by proxy, you're impugning the president. And even then, like what does Kash know about this case, to be honest with you? I don't really know. Probably not much. He's got a huge agency to follow. So his people come to him and they say, we got him. He says, great, amazing job. Validates it, probably hands it off and passes it on to the next guy while he's worried about the next thing. So what I'm basically arguing against is a bureaucracy. And I do believe that there are still bad actors inside the DOJ and the FBI and the CIA, even though you've got Todd Blanche at the helm, Kash at the head of the FBI, and Ratcliffe at the head of the CIA. I still think that they're massive, massive agencies. James Comey literally was telling them to just bide your time, hang out. We'll be back in power soon. Don't go anywhere. You can do more inside than outside. So just like dig your heels in and stay anchored in. And we know that these agencies have a history of acting against President Trump. They did that in 2020. They hid evidence from him. He was in charge. They hid evidence from him about 2020, the election. They were covering up for Joe Biden while they were manufacturing evidence against Trump in 2020 to protect Joe Biden's actual criminal allegations. So, like, even if you are the president, even if you have all agencies under your official power, they'll still act against you and cover up things that are bad for them and good for you. Like, wouldn't it be good for President Trump if it turns out that the entire January 6th thing is provably a now CIA employee who did it, not some random autistic kid who caused the pipe bomb, who distracted the Capitol Police? It was all an op. Trump's own CIA actually engineered the Fedsurrection. This could be the keystone that answers all those questions. So, in fact, I think the fight for truth is actually in furtherance of the president's ability to control and govern. If the CIA was willing to engineer January 6th and then have an actor do something and then bring her on the payroll, then what else were they willing to do as it relates to the actual 2020 election? This whole thing might be vindicated on the back of Brian Cole's innocence, or maybe not. Maybe a lot more evidence comes out and it's very clear that he's guilty and the CIA had nothing to do with it. So I don't see it as doomerism. I understand your point. There is a lot of doomerism out there, and we really try not to indulge in that. Like, everything sucks. Nothing's happening. We're losing. Democrats are winning. All the things. And so I'm going to go vote, like people say, I'm going to go vote Democrat, or I'm just going to stay home or something. To me, that's always felt like you're just ceding the territory. You're just giving the win to your opponents by default by checking out, becoming depressed, becoming, disengaged, and allowing them to win, Never been for that, never tried to do that, even though we've had some, policy objections with the administration. At this point in American public life, it's like if you're not on a team and you're going to be, an independent person, as you claim to be, in many ways, that's fine. You can have your principles. I support it. You don't have to, be a cultist or follow along and, follow the bouncing ball through everything. But at the same time, you have to also understand the practical effects of that decision and what it is doing. And if you're willing to abandon the game and cede territory to the DSA, then you may, there's a phrase, do you want to win or do you want to be right? Okay, there's a bucket of people that want to be right at the expense of losing, and then things are going to get dramatically worse. And I've never really believed this accelerationist concept like, well, if the Democrats win, then things will get so bad that it will engineer the right, and the right will have a resurgence and will come back and fix a bunch of things. It doesn't take long to destroy the whole nation. Look what Joe Biden did in 4 simple years with the mass invasion that we all suffered through. And now it's going to take us, 3 times, like if he brought in 3 to 5 million people a year, which he did, let's say 20 million over 4 years, we have to do that in reverse. We can't do that in reverse, evidently. And so you ultimately are going steps back. Like they go 10 steps forward, marching off the cliff of America. And then we can only go back 5 steps or even 2 steps a year until we get the next term. And so anyways, fixing the problem is a lot harder than solving the problem. So that is what I'm saying, B Money. And I definitely don't want an innocent person to go to jail, as we mentioned earlier, and I don't want guilty people to go free. And so, like always, like Tyler Robinson, like any of these other cases, we're trying to judge the facts as they come through. And there may be a lot more that says that Brian Cole is in fact the sole actor here, and it may all make sense by the time we get at the outcome here. But when I hear guys like, Baker coming out and explaining his take on this and what he's experienced firsthand, he's a firsthand witness saying that he got calls from Cash and Dan, and there's other, benign reasons for that, I might say, because they want to declare this a victory and they don't want people to tear that down. But it's in service, I think, of a higher deliverable, which is we've got a problem with our intelligence agencies. They've rigged multiple elections against the president. And if that is continuing on, that needs to be smashed into oblivion. So, but I understand your take. And again, we never want to be doomers here. And I do think that Trump, can't know everything. And so there needs to be, the people is the final check on everything. Don't just swap the head of the agency and then everything is, hunky-dory, everything's perfect. People have to continue to check these bureaucracies because they're massive. There are tens of thousands of people in them, and many of them are bad actors. And Jocelyn Ballantyne is still the prosecutor at the DOJ. Why were the J6 prosecutors all not fired? She's still there prosecuting this case. So the case is currently tainted even as it stands right now. But I appreciate your comment. Thank you for the dono, B Money. We do have to stay positive. So thanks for holding the tension on that. Joe Maz, what's up? Hey, like many of Steve's interviews, this one is worth using the Rumble app's new feature to download the video to watch later. So much good info. Thanks again, Steve, courtesy of Joe Maz on Rumble. Thank you, Joe Maz. We appreciate that. He is, the dude's been on it for years, and he knows all of the details. Just Rhonda, 29 months as a member. Thank you, Rhonda. We've had your back all morning. Thank you. We appreciate that. We need it. I can't be left to my own devices. And Holly, your face once you knew the stream was acting up was priceless. Don't sweat it though. All great. We've got it recorded. I tried a new feature like an idiot on today, but YouTube just rolled out both vertical and horizontal streams. And so I made the switch, and apparently only the vertical stream was working, not the horizontal stream. So I had to go in there and fix it live while I'm trying to listen to Steve. But I got it all recorded. So we'll make sure we get a good edit in and then get the full thing out so that nobody misses that beautiful intro that we put together. Holly, thank you for that. And we got some other comments. Spud says, who wins the DEI credibility sweepstakes when it comes to a DC jury? An autistic young black man or a Subaru driving white female? Good question there, Spuds. Yeah. DC has a very high percentage of African-American individuals here, many of whom I suspect will be on the jury. We'll see if that comes into the picture, but it is curious. It is curious. We'll see, Spuds. Hey, and Nevermind says, thank you, Steve. You are amazing from Nevermind. Prayers for you and your family, Steve, if you're still out there. Good comment from Nevermind. Rick D. Rick, sorry I didn't get to this one. I'm curious what Mr. Baker thinks about the Data Republican issue that arose yesterday. Yeah, so Data Republican, I did see that after the show there, Rick. Data said that she was fed information that was illegal. And then the person who fed her the information responded to her and said, it's not illegal. It's a FOIA. It's legal. And then there was a bunch of back and forth on that on X last night. Everybody was duking it out over that issue. So I don't really know. It sounds like somebody was just trying to hand her a scoop. She thinks, or maybe is accurate. I don't know. I didn't see the actual documents, but it was Marco Rubio's like undersecretary of somebody at the State Department. So she then got on and responded to Data and said, it's not that at all. So you can take a look at that. I don't really know. I haven't seen the full documents. I know that she did drop some screenshots of the documents. So I don't know what Data Republican got, but we read a lot of documents here, a lot. It's kind of our bread and butter. And so I don't know if that makes, or depending on what it is, obviously she, shouldn't be disclosing classified document stuff, but also classified documents leak, all the time, and journalists report those things. So anyways, it feels like the whole thing may have just been a miscommunication and a misunderstanding, but we don't want our own side like knifing each other in the back or setting each other in the back or misinterpreting things that are mostly benign and harmless. But I don't know the full backstory there. And it feels weird that a right-leaning Rubio person would try to take out a right-leaning X person. That feels a little bit incongruent. Like if you're going to set somebody up, send it to some other New York Times reporter. Laura and Lucy the dog, but they would publish it, right? They would just say, oh, it's classified. I don't care. It's, I've got journalistic privilege, so I'm just going to release this. I didn't steal it. It came into my possession. This is newsworthy. Under the First Amendment, I can publish it. But anyways, we all just want to get along, okay? Just hug it out, you two. Laura and Lucy the dog. Wow, the truth is coming out, and I think Steve Baker should get the reward money for not giving into the deep state. Yeah, exactly. He deserves that $500K. He identified somebody. The FBI went and looked at her, and then all of a sudden, their cell phone footage started to work again. Wow, isn't that something? So, Relantel, what's up, Relantel? Thank you for sending in, bringing in 5 new members. Relantel, what's up? Bringing in Bueno. We got Rolling on the Floor Laughing, McLOL. Welcome. We love ourselves some McLulls. Sock Puddles, welcome. William Collin and Tonda McCarthy, all gifted members courtesy of Relantel. We'll be back Monday morning for a members only stream, and it's going to be so good. You have no idea. Just Rhonda sending in this dono. Rob, I'm sending you an urgent email after we're finished here. I need you to read it and get back to me at your convenience. I'll do it, Just Rhonda. Sounds very urgent indeed. Yeah, I'll do it. I got a phone call I got to make, and then I'll be taking a look at your email. So send it in hot, and we'll see what is going on and how I can help. And so thank you, my friends, for sending those in. Let's take a look, see if we got any final comments in on, I think we're going to cover the Brian Cole case. Of course, it's a federal case, so there's nothing really to actually live stream or anything. But we're going to be going through it. And I know it's funny. So some great comments over on X as well. Let me just hit some of these. MMH, this was excellent. I've heard Steve tell this story over a dozen times. I know I've too. It's really good. And can't wait until he doesn't have to hold back on some of the additional details. I know. And every time you hear from Steve or you talk to him, there's always like a little bit more, like it's inching forward. You're like, just give me everything. It's like, can't do it. Trial's coming up. So he's great. He does a really good job. And I think he's doing the responsible thing, obviously, but it is, there is a lot more that is there. Obviously he has it. The defense lawyers absolutely have it. And so that's why we wanted to read some of those documents so that you can see what's inside the subpoenas that they're now really latching onto to make their case. Good to see you, MMH. Thank you for the heads up. Just followed you back. What's up? She thinks freely. Joe Kent recruited Steve Baker. Joe Kent told him where Shawnee worked, allegedly. I wish I could have asked him about that. I don't know. That's from She Thinks Freely. I mean, he told the story. It sounds like he was just watching a lot of footage. Shawnee was a pretty high profile person on the day of J6 because she was up there blasting fools. Pop, 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 according to the reports. So I don't know if there was a connection there, but maybe Joe Kent would know. I don't know. Hey, Common, you don't prioritize trespassing over coordinated bombs next to a VP. Was the public warned and the president rushed away to a bunker? No. I mean, after she was. They did an initial search, bring her in. She's like feet away from it, goes inside. Then they discover it. Then I think they moved her out the back. Coordinated bombs in D.C. means possible coordinated attack. No, Pelosi moaned about calling the National Guard on the citizens instead. She did. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing feels like a setup because of that. They refused to answer Stephen Sun's phone calls. He wanted support. They could have had a lot of support. The bombs came out right at the most perfect time. Everybody gets deviated away from the Capitol building. You heard the numbers. He said, what, 2,000 Capitol police, like 250 of them were actually on duty? Crazy. There's video footage of Capitol cops saying, we were set up. We got set up, man. They said that. Like they wanted this to happen. This was the exit plan. You've all seen Ocean's 13 or something. Once the casino gets ransacked, you need an exit strategy. You need to shake the building with that underground tunnel digger. And they shake the building. Everybody leaves. They get a little earthquake. They say, hit them again, shake the building harder. Everybody leaves. So that in that movie, they can all run out with their cash. And in 2020 and 21, so that they could all run out with their votes, you know? Philip Wrigley, hey, great interview, Rob. Steve, just subscribe to Watching the Watchers. Philip, amazing, my man. Thank you for saying that over on X. Just followed you back. Lori on Liberty, it has not gone away in Connecticut. It has not gone away in Connecticut. What's up, Lori on Liberty? Founder of Connecticut Law Initiative, God-fearing natural woman, amazing, Swamp Yankee, proudly unaffiliated and a constitutional conservative. Heck yeah, let's go. Lori, thank you. Tom Cornwell, hey, great in-depth interview of the Brian Cole Jr. case. Damn it, Steve, why does the FBI persist in pushing this fiction? Well, you know, it's a win. They needed a big win on this. And if Brian Cole, in fact, is the pipe bomber, then it's a big win. I mean, it's a win that the other FBI just could not figure out. And then Cash came in and solves it. And lo and behold, it's case closed. But if not, then it's not going to look so good. Ultra MAGA, what's up? CIA employee subpoenaed. OMG, I've not heard this before. Every person in the J6 cover-up should be in prison. Yeah, there was a lot of it. I mean, there were feds there in the chat. We got Ray Epps, who got accolades. Everybody, he's so amazing. Why were you so victimized by the right? And yeah, there's a lot to it. A-Peak, hey, thank you, Rob, for YouTube. Thank you, A-Peak. Chrissy, what's up, Chrissy? Thank you for the comment. Pete Za shared a map. Thank you, Pete Za, for a couple of those other posts. Says hashtag free Brian Cole over on X. And actually shared this image. Yeah, this was the shoe image from Steve Baker. Yeah, it's a great image right here. Let me just pop this up. Boom, right there. That's the shoe. That's the 9 versus the 12-foot shoe. Steve Baker went out, measured the whole thing, and it was beautiful. All right, so friends, let us pause here on the day. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for giving Steve a follow and making sure you're sending him some love. Walk It Off says, that was a real treat indeed. 100%, man. 100%. That's why we wanted to make sure we could really dig into it, and we did. Mission accomplished. Thank you, Steve Baker. Dolphin Girl, do you have a Cash App? I don't think I do, actually. I don't think I do. But I think you're asking because you want to send us some cash. That's really nice of you to say that, Dolphin Girl. Maybe I'll need to make one. But I don't at the moment. But Dolphin Girl, we're just happy you're here. Thank you for watching the show. Thank you for joining us this morning and for being a member over on Locals. We really appreciate that. Let's make sure we didn't miss anything. And then we'll wrap it up on the day. We are looking good. All right. So Once again, thank you to our amazing mods and meme smiths, Muffin Rando. We got Donut Mind Me. We got John McGarvey in the house clipping away for us. We got K Bean, of course, always holding the fort down for us. We got Neuro D, Janek, and Dog Digger on the Rumbles. Jigum Gigum, Elliot, and just Rhonda and Jigum. Shout out to that amazing meme today. You're incredible. But we'll pause here for the weekend, my friends. We'll get some good rest, some relaxation, some recovery. And then on Monday, we shall return to get into it again. And we hope that you come back and join us because it's about to get spicy here as the midterms continue to advance, and we'll have a lot more work and justice to unpack together. So we'll pause here. Hopefully you're doing something fun, something energizing, recharging those batteries, getting outside, getting some fresh air, spending time with friends, family, all the people that we love. And then you come on back here on Monday to join us again. And until we're back here, my friends, remember, we're going to need to see you right back here so that together, with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Make it a beautiful night. Sleep very well. We'll see you right back here on Monday. And I don't think we have the song here because we're in interview moment, but make it a great weekend, and we'll see you back here very soon. Until we're back, be well, and bye-bye.